Live.
All right.
And yes. And we have with us tonight the legendary Geoff Stunkard.
Yep. I'm here with Uncle Tony, one of my heroes. I sent him a picture of all my magazine collections. There's only one that has a name on it. It says Specials Drag Racing, and it says Argus, DeFeo, and something else. But you're the only name that's on the spine of one of my magazine boxes. And I didn't put that on there for this. I mean, I wrote that on there 25 years ago. So you had an impression on my young journalistic talent.
And you see, I always thought of you as one of the senior guys.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, maybe I'm just an old soul. Well, the thing is I always loved the media side of this whole thing. And I got to be honest with you, I wouldn't have wanted to be in it any other time, because I got to meet all the old guys after they had retired, including the photographers and the editors who had made all this fame for me. And I used all that stuff to do research, to interview people, to talk to people. And it made it again, it was just a wonderful, wonderful time. That time from, say, 1985 to 2000, most of those guys were still alive. There were racers reunions that just started. I went to the first Bakersfield reunion and remember seeing Dave McClellan in his Fiat in primer, doing burnouts, and guys warming up small block Chevy Nitro cars rolled off the back of their open trailers. It was so pure. And I went out a few years ago for the March. Actually, I was out for Bakersfield with Corey Lee in the Pandemonium car, probably in, may have been 10 years, 2013. But it was completely different than the first year I was there. So that moment in time, like I said, between say 85 and 2000, it was so cool to be in this business right then. And especially the way I focused on it, because my focus was always history. I love the idea of a funny car. I love this idea of this stock-bodied vehicle that suddenly was growing parts from underneath it and out the hood. And I can still remember my dad had bought me a 68 Charger as my first car because I had wrecked the family car. So he goes and buys me a 68 Charger. Up until the day I got that car, I didn't care about cars. I was busy with, whatever I was interested in, music, records, left-handed cigarettes, whatever came up. But the thing is when I pulled into high school with that 68 Charger, all of a sudden, people knew who I was, and I said, I got to figure this out. So here's what happened. Now it's probably 3 or 4 months later, I'm up at a flea market, and I'm buying magazines, and there's old copies of Superstock, and here's my 68 Charger on the cover in a review. But the picture that got me was Bob Banning's stock-bodied 68 Charger doing a wheel stand inside. I said, this thing looks just like my car, but it's doing wheelies, and it's got a blower, and it's got headers. And so carry forward a couple more years, and I'm in Philly, and I'm arrested street racing. I get in all kinds of trouble. And so I got to figure out a way to stay involved in racing. So that was when I decided, hey, I'll try to do this as a media guy. I don't want to get busted again. So I wasn't enough of a purist performance guy that I had to have speed under my foot. But like I said, I was in love with photography. I was in love with the whole media idea. So I dropped out of college. I went in, and I was in my second year, and I talked to the photography guys and at the photo shop, and they said, look, if you're going to do sports photography, don't even do school, because you're either going to make it or you don't. You either got it or you don't. So you need to just burn film. Take all the money you'd go to college with and burn film with it. So I did. So I'd be at Maple Grove with a sheet of slides, yelling through the fence at Steve Collison or Francis Butler, saying, hey, can I send this to you? Will you publish it? And, and I, part of it was pride. I was just obnoxious. I think they liked my gumption. But again, it began working out. So my first photo in a real magazine was of Jim Barolaro and the Crispin Comet at Englishtown during the Summer Nationals. I was so pissed because I had showed up to get pictures of it running, and they wouldn't let him run. I think it was the same year Garlitz blew over, so I was there for that and got pictures of that. So I guess it was okay.
Wait, but they did let it run that weekend. I was there, and if you see any pictures of that car, I'm pushing it backwards after the burnout.
Okay. Well, maybe it didn't run the day. Maybe they only ran it on Sunday. Maybe that's what happened. I came up on Friday, and Garlitz blew over Friday afternoon. And then, so yeah, maybe the bottom line was I didn't get to see it run, but Jim and I became good buddies, and I did some trading cards for him, and was involved with both that and the flip top car he had, and we had fun. So it all worked out in the end.
Right before Jim died, he was building a slingshot dragster with a camera. And I was supposed to set up the motor and tune it and everything for him.
Is that right?
Then he had that stroke, and then he died like about a year later.
Yeah. Do his kids still have that stuff?
Yes, his kids have all that stuff, and I'm going to go over there soon.
Yeah, they're over in this area. They're down by Knoxville someplace.
Yeah. Now you're in Tennessee also.
Yeah, I'm up. When I came to work for IHRA in '96, at that point I'd worked at Citibank for 10 years. But my job at Citibank was on night shift, and I worked 3 days a week. I worked 3 14-hour shifts, and half the year I was Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Half the year I was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So you can imagine me on a Wednesday morning, little coffee, and I'm driving to Indy, or it's the middle of the night on Saturday, and I'm driving back from ATCO, having worked all night Friday, and having gone to Englishtown, and then come down to ATCO on the way back. And I finally had to stop doing that, because one night I'm coming down US 1, and there's a whale in the middle of the highway, and it keeps getting closer and closer. Well, it was a semi. I'd fallen asleep with my eyes open. I was getting ready to drive underneath it, and I said, you know what? This is too dangerous. I got to quit doing this. But yeah, I pulled some all-nighters with that stuff. So, but when I went to work for IHRA,
did you ever have those peripheral vision hallucinations going down the highway?
Not that way. But like I said, I was, if I hadn't woken up when I was accelerating to go underneath it. But I'm thinking it's a whale in the middle of the street, and I'm like, man, it's getting closer and closer. I was tripping, but it was crazy.
I was once bouncing between two cars, and I had to be in Atco, New Jersey on whatever it was, like Friday, and then Union Grove on Saturday. So I had to burn, after we finished up, I had to burn rubber and get across. And I actually slept all the way through Indiana. I slept to go through Indiana. I stopped and paid tolls.
Oh, I know. Yeah, we do stupid stuff. It's a wonder we didn't kill anybody. I mean, I've got pictures in my archive of, I've got pictures from police files and things like that of, funny cars and people who got hurt on the highway. Just not good. But anyway, the bottom line is I ended up here in Bristol. I quit working for the bank. I took a little bit of dog and pay. We were 6 issues behind of the magazine. So Don Gillespie and I had to put together an issue a week through the rest of that summer. My family didn't come down until later in '96. And then, so my wife and I, we found this farm. It's 10 acres and about 30 miles from the track. I bought it in October. Bader bought IHRA in November. He moved it to Ohio in January. Thought I was coming. My whole staff quit. I said, Bill, I can't. I'm not pulling up after having waited this long to actually own something. And, so I've again been king of the freelancers ever since.
And now YouTube.
And I got to tell you, it's been a week. My Mopar Action Got Shot thing has got 7,000 views in 6 days, thanks to your help. A couple other people helped me out. So I'm actually starting to get the visceral thrill of this. My wife is already seeing the mania in my eyes, because there's ideas cranking, and I'm not sleeping like I should, and I'm thinking of ideas, and and I'm doing a lot of post-production. I know we talked about that, but I'm actually putting a lot of little sequences together using Premiere Rush, and so I'm loving it.
You can't help but do a high-quality product. That's just in your DNA.
Yeah, I think it is.
Before we go any further, tell people the name of your channel, give them a chance to go over there and sub, right?
Yeah. So my new channel is called Geoff Stunkard's Zookeeper's Diary. I managed to edit Mopar Action for the past 5 years, and they pulled the plug on that last November. But Cliff Gromer, who's been around since Cars Illustrated in the late 60s and worked with Joe Oldham at Popular Mechanics, Gromer said, we're going to call you the Zookeeper. So I said, okay, I got an AR-15, I got a snake hook, I can take care of whatever problems we run into. So I was the Zookeeper, and we called my column Zookeeper's Diary. So I just thought I'd carry that on as Geoff Stunkard's Zookeeper's Diary on YouTube. All
right, so guys, go over there and give Geoff a sub. He's gonna be over 1 million before you know it. This guy's just awesome. But listen,
that would be cool, because it is a rush to see people are watching it. Because I don't think of myself from a media standpoint of creating this kind of content. I'm used to writing and editing photos. But again, the more I do it, the more rhythm I get to it. I think it's going to get better and better. I got a pile of ideas, so we'll just keep playing with it. And,
well, you know,
see what happens.
I've always run my channel more or less as a magazine because that was my background. I started doing magazines, and so with a magazine, you have to do, you know, you do a flow sheet, right? And the magazine is got to have, well, you got to have a tech story, then you have to have like a car feature, and you have a personality thing, and then you have to have a historical thing, and then you have to have a competition thing, and you have to have a color thing, and then you have to, and then you put all that together, and you got a magazine. And
that someone's going to read for 30 days, you know, and we're doing stuff someone's going to watch for, let's say, for 10 minutes or 30 minutes. So it's a different animal, and you got to kind of adapt to it.
That's how I've structured my channel. As a magazine, because I
now you know the magazine business saved nitro racing. You're aware of that, right?
Say that again.
The magazine business saved nitro. Do you know how that happened?
When you're talking about back in the 70s?
No, I'm talking about back in the 50s.
In the 50s, okay.
So I'm having dinner with Garlitz one night, right? And he's telling me this because I'm a train guy. In fact, my connection with Tom Hoover, who was the engineer at Chrysler who invented the Hemi, was trains. I love railroading, and he loved railroading. He went to work for General Electric after he left Chrysler and engineered diesel locomotives, and his son does to this day. So we talk trains. Anyway, I'm talking to Garlitz, and Bruce Larson and a couple of the other guys from the shop were sitting down by his museum, and he was talking about, well, you heard why nitro racing almost ended back in the 50s. And I said, well, no, I've never heard that. He said, well, in Peoria, they were shifting a tank car in nitro, and it blew up. It blew a giant hole in the ground. And they said, and so nitro became basically unavailable. You couldn't buy it in bulk. And they found out that the printers were still getting it to use for cleaning steel plates off. So they began going to the commercial printer. That's why Commercial Solvents was the place you got nitro from. But that was because of the printing business. To clean plates, you needed to clean it. The nitromethane worked great for that. And at that point, obviously, we hadn't had 9/11. There were no restrictions on its purchase. And once that thing got settled down, then it was 55-gallon drums traveling around instead of tank car loads. Because, you know, apparently it blew a giant hole in it, leveled a couple of houses, blew rail cars all over the place. So a perfect story for a drag race railroad guy.
After, what was it? That bombing.
After 9/11, after 1993, the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City.
We couldn't get nitro. And I had pooled a couple of guys together, and we were going to buy a railroad car full of the stuff.
Yeah.
Chinese nitro. And I had almost all of the connections together. I needed a good interpreter. That was the big thing. And then my phone was tapped.
Right.
I had my phone tapped. That's what I was.
Wow, that's crazy, man. Well, you know, we're going to talk a little about these old magazines, but, you know, it's crazy that, you know, when you consider the kind of stuff we like to play with in the drag racing hobby, we draw the attention of certain people who want to make sure we're not being dangerous with our fireworks.
We're just trying to have some fun. You know?
That's all. It's all fun and games till someone gets hurt, right?
I'm so glad that's behind me. I'm so glad I got that out of my system, and I'm just like, I look back on it, and I'm like, after the PTSD, I'm like, no, just never again.
Well, you know, and you know, I heard you and Brian talking about Bobby Lagana. I was up there that day that happened, and so, you know, the car accelerated down into that quarry down there, and I'm standing on the starting line shooting photos, and you know, and you know, frankly, I figured he was gone. I figured he was dead. You know, I had a problem at that track some years earlier because somebody had been tuning a motor, and I hate to say, I think it was Clayton Harris. He had one blow up when they were trying to crank it over and staging, and it put a couple of people in the hospital. It fragged a bunch of stuff out of it. So it's not a game. So it's you know, you can really get hurt if you're not careful. But the PTSD, yeah, I don't stand between two top fuel cars anymore. I'm past all that stuff.
I never, you know, I told the story with Brian, but I never actually told the mechanical part of it, what had happened.
Tell me about it.
What's that?
I said, tell me about it.
The car had broken a bottom frame rail the week before.
Oh yeah, you told Brian. Yeah, you told Brian that it passed tech with it and didn't fail it.
Yeah, and I ripped the tech guy a new asshole after that. It was. But anyway, make a long story short, all of the controls of the car were run through the top right frame rail.
Okay.
So the fuel shut off, the chutes, the throttle, every cable was run through that frame rail. Okay? He got out about 300 feet, and the chassis buckled like this.
Okay.
And when it buckled, it pinched, it folded over the top frame rails.
Right.
About 300 feet out. Well, he had nowhere to shut the car off. He had nowhere to pull
Well, and it was running hard when it got down to the end of the racetrack. I mean, it went off the end of the racetrack under power.
Yep. He was just along for the ride from 300 feet until he was in the woods.
Oh man, that sucked. Yeah, that was not. I had some bad days at IHRA with that kind of stuff, and yeah, that was not good. You know, I was at Daytona the weekend Earnhardt got killed, and I decided I didn't need to stay for the race, so I would have been down there shooting photos had I been there. And you know, everybody likes to see a fireball and stuff like that, but nobody wants to see anyone get hurt. And stuff happens.
It's an unfortunate reality.
Well, you want to go fast, you know, and again, you look at the history of motorsports. Horsepower will always exceed safety capacity until they address whatever the safety capacity is. You know, NHRA said these rules are written in blood. The truth is, at speed, you'd find out, like, you know, Les Ritchie at Fontana, that you did need an anti-submarining belt if you ran your door car into something at high speed, because you were going to come through the seat belts underneath the car, you know, and your body doesn't stay together. It sucks. But he had to find that stuff out the hard way. So, but that was all part of this whole mystique that we got from the magazines. And, you know, we understood that these guys were, you know, they were pushing the envelope. So.
But let's talk about the magazines, because you ended up here on YouTube, and we're doing all this because Mopar Action died. Mopar Action is a magazine that I actually started. I got the first copy of it.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you were involved in that. Yeah.
Involved. I started it.
Well, you know, yes, that's true. That's exactly right. In fact, it's probably in that box with your name on it.
I ran it. What happened was I started High Performance Mopar over at CSK.
Right.
Then I wasn't making the money that I wanted to, so I went over to Harris and I started High Performance Mopar Action to compete with High Performance Mopar.
Okay.
I put 3 issues out, and then I said, "Screw this! I'm going drag racing." And so I swear to God, man, I had you remember Harris's office was on Broadway in front of the Flatiron Building, and I had and I pulled up in front of the office, and I looked up and I said, "Not today," and I went home, and that was it. It was like done with the magazine business for several years, and that's when I went.
Well, I went the exact opposite. So once I got published in Super Ford, you know, I was trickling little things out, but then I got an in with Drag Racing Magazine. Peterson's was doing drag racing, so I started doing these interviews. I interviewed Herb McCandless was one of the first people I talked to. I talked to Larry Arnold. You know, they gave me a list of people they wanted me to go to. So that's how I kind of started these historical interviews. And then they pulled the plug on that magazine. That got killed. That should have been a sign. That was in 87 or 88.
Yep.
So then I showed up at Englishtown, and I didn't have my credentials were gone. And at that point, NHRA was pretty difficult on credentials. You really, it was blood, sweat, and tears to get a photo pass.
I was blacklisted.
So I called a guy named Greg Rager at Mopar Muscle in Florida, who I had talked to one time before. And I said, "Greg, here's the deal. I'm at Englishtown. They need a reference for a magazine story. If you fax them something, I'll write the story for free." And that was how it really started. Because soon after that, I began working for Steve Collison at Superstock, and I was doing stuff for Super Ford on their yearly racing deal, and it just kind of snowballed for there. And then I did my big funny car series for Steve Collison in the mid '90s. And, you know, I don't know if he ever forgave me. The last chapter of that, the 74 chapter, I never got done. I went to work for IHRA. I was publishing my own magazine at that point, Quarter Milestones. I had to shoot that in the head. I killed any other outside media work I was doing because I was so swamped with getting this IHRA magazine caught up to the subscription number we had.
I worked for Collison at Superstock for the last 3 years. It was like an overlapping thing for me. I was still doing the Nitro thing, but I wanted to get back into the magazines. I couldn't get anything in Mopar Action because Rick Ehrenberg was like, "I quit. You take anything from DeFeo and I quit." So that was the
Well, here was the thing. I got to know Rick, and you know, the thing is he really was careful to want to guard that territory. And I understood that that was just the way he was. That's just, people have personality quirks. If you don't like my loud voice, guess what? You're going to have to get out of here because you're stuck with it. Well, if you wanted anybody else to write tech, Ehrenberg said he was going to walk. So, you know, Cliff basically, because Cliff was not a big Mopar only guy. I'm more of a Mopar psycho, and Ehrenberg is more like you. He's a Mopar mechanic. And Cliff was just a great writer, and he was able to adapt facts, and he'd run everything. The whole magazine would go by Rick when Cliff was done with it, just to make sure that we didn't screw anything up. And my stuff would go by Rick too, and he'd call me up and say, you know, what do you think of this? I said, no, I got all Chrysler's product planning work for the racing program here. I can pull that page out, and I can tell you that this happened in early '67, and it's signed off by Hoover and Coddington and Mike Buckle and those guys. So it's legit, you know, and so we'd go back and forth with that, but that was just the way he was. And, you know, like I said, everybody's got their own wheelhouse. That was his. Nobody got into Rick's space.
Well, I worked for Collison, like I said, for the last 3 years that he was doing the last 3 years at Superstock and Drag Illustrated and I was there for the name change from Superstock and Drag Illustrated.
It became Drag Racing Monthly.
Yeah. Which was a big mistake, but that's besides the point.
You know, and at that point, I think Bob Guccione owned it, and yes, I know Collison had stories about going up to New York to the Penthouse offices, and it was a pretty rude situation from a media standpoint. You kind of had to go through a lot of malarkey to get to anything regarding anything other than women.
Steve was still over at CSK doing Muscle Mustangs and Fast Forward.
Yeah, that's right.
And I was actually up for the editor's job at Superstock.
Okay.
They flew me, Guccione's people flew me out there. I stayed at Al Kirschenbaum's place for a week.
Okay.
I interviewed for the job. They shook my hand. Okay? They shook my hand. I was the editor of Superstock and Drag Illustrated. It was like the greatest thing that could possibly happen.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I get on a plane to fly home. I get home, and I find out that Collison went up there at the same time, and they hired him. And up to that point, Collison and I were like this. We did not like each other.
Oh, man.
Just something clicked, and we became friends. And the last 3 years, and you know what? All that shit is gone now, right? You know,
I mean, he was a great guy. I mean, the last time I hung out with him, we were at one of Dave Wallace's big shindigs in Indy for media guys during PRI. And, you know, we sat in Buca de Beppa and had a beer or three together, and we laughed, and I'd just gone on at Mopar Muscle, actually, just come on as editor at Mopar Muscle after 3 years of freelancing after the IHRA deal blew up.
Okay.
So,
but listen, I really want to get into magazines, not just our own personal histories.
The problem is, you know, there's stories after stories. Well, I'll tell you what. You throw me a question, and I'll try to do like I do on Meekum TV. I'll try to keep it short and sweet. So you throw me a question, and I'll try to answer.
Oh, what did you say?
Say hello to the viewers.
Yes, Kathy's saying say hello to the viewers. I know you're
viewers. What's up? I'm used to writing magazines. I'd be used to getting a letter from you. But as you can see, I'm going to put this other earplug in because too many Top Fuel cars on the wrong side of the motor. But anyway, hey, it's so cool to be here with you, Tony, because this is a cool deal. So this is great.
Oh, it's great having you here, man. And like I said, we could talk about our own personal things.
We could.
Yeah. But like I said, I want to talk about the history of magazines because a lot of the people, the younger people now, right? Anybody under, let's say, 40 years old, cannot comprehend the importance of these magazines.
Right.
Our culture.
So you start out with that guy in the Twilight Zone in a meme that says, "Imagine the world with no internet," and really imagine that. Because here's the thing: the magazines came out every month. So I started buying magazines on the newsstand. I graduated from high school in '81, so it would have been '79, '80. And you would go into the newsstand, and there was a rack of magazines. And at this point, everything wasn't out there yet. There was no Super Ford or Mopar Muscle. It was Hot Rod, Carcraft, Popular Hot Rodding, Super Chevy, Super Stock and Drag Illustrated,
Drag Racing USA.
But you would go and buy that. If you were into it, you'd go buy 2 or 3 of them every time you went to the newsstand. And you know what? You'd read them once, and they'd sit on the back of the toilet or sit in the garage. And you'd always remember that one story. I'll tell you, one that always made a big impression on me was Paul Rossi's 6-pack Challenger. Now, Paul, and I've had a great relationship with him for the last couple of years since he's come back with that tribute car he built. You know, he understood the value of media. So he went to Popular Hot Rodding and said, look, you know, we'll set this thing up. And he had stories about tuning 6-pack carburetors and stuff like that. And that thing wheel stood, and it was like nothing else. I mean, it was. And I never forgot when that issue came out because there wasn't a lot of Mopar stuff in there. It was mostly, right. At that point, Pro Street Camaro was the way to go. And again, magazine editors and publishers tend to not want to take too many risks with their readership. So you'd throw the Mopar guys a bone once or twice a year, and then, you know, and then that would be it. But anyway, you'd buy these 3 or 4 magazines, and that stack would grow and grow and grow. For me personally, then it became, I got to get all the back issues of these magazines. And then the hunt was on. So I sent Kathy some photos. There's some copies of Drag Racing still in the brown paper.
Yeah, we'll go through the photos in a second. But
yeah,
as far as the magazines go, right? Like I said, there was nothing, like there was no connection to any aspect of the automotive world if it didn't come through the magazines.
Right, you know, that's true.
So the importance of these things in their day was like more than YouTube is today, right?
Oh yeah, when you spread it out and you begin looking at Motor Trend and Car and Driver, I mean, you know, these were the magazines that were setting the standard. You know, you'd get the technical reviews of the vehicles. You know, the new cars would go to these magazines and people would try them out. So again, you got to think of the malaise that was of the late 70s, early 80s, and then all of a sudden the 82 Camaro came out. And, you know, and Shelby's building these 2.2 Chargers. Rossi was part of that. And then the Aero-styled Chevy Coupe for NASCAR. And, you know, all of a sudden, the performance industry began to grow just as that moment came. And then all these little tiny niche magazines showed up. So suddenly you go to the newsstand and there were 30 magazines. Well, so I was a Mopar guy. I could buy 4 different magazines that had Mopars in them by the mid-1990s.
But you see, at CSK, we were guilty of that fragmentation. And when I look back at it, I regret it. Because we were doing Pontiac, Vet, Mopar, right? We were doing all these niche magazines where that really didn't happen at that point. It was still, you know, like a general audience. And then we fragmented it. Now,
well, yeah, so let's talk about that aspect for a minute. So you think about advertisers. So in the Pontiac community is a great example. This is a niche community, but you have suppliers in that community who would never advertise in Hot Rod or Carcraft because of the cost. They might have thrown an ad into Guide to Muscle Cars or into what became Muscle Car Review. That was car trying to think what they called it. Dobbs started up anyway. But when they had a specialized magazine just for Pontiac, you know, they were all in with that deal. And so I think the ad guys thought they could sell paper. And then you ended up with a deal where if you had a general advertiser, say a Year One or Classic Industries, you could get them to advertise across the 6 titles and get revenue, a full page of revenue from each book based on a sliding ratio, but still put ads in. And I think that was what really resulted in that fragmentation happening.
Well, yes, it was good from an industry standpoint, but it was terrible from a social standpoint. Because previous to, okay, so now when I was coming up, I learned about everything. I was always a Mopar guy. I was a Mopar guy from birth. Right. Okay. Right. But I learned about everything, right? I learned about Chevys. I learned about Pontiacs. I learned about Fords. I learned about AMCs. I learned about everything that there was because it was all in those general interest magazines like Hot Rod, Carcraft, Hot Rod, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Once the 80s came and things started to fragment into their own unique little niches, then the automotive culture fragmented. And now if you were a Mopar guy, you knew nothing about Cobra Jet Fords. And if you were a Ford guy, you knew nothing about Corvairs. And you see what I'm saying?
That was definitely true. So, and, you know, but think about this part though too, Tony. I mean, those of us who were street racing, you know, there was a lot of pride on the line when you were racing somebody else's brand. I mean, you kind of hung together. I remember a Mopar show in Delaware where a guy pulled a pretty nice Camaro in, about 20 guys picked this car up. They were going to take it out into the ocean, and they didn't. But I'm just saying, like, there was a certain militancy about your brand. And for Mopar guys, you know, we took it personal. We're like, you know, we're the guys who power the funny cars and the fuel cars, and you know, and all we deal with are these Camaro guys, these wise guys. So the Camaro guys usually had money to build motors and do stuff like that. I'd show up at Front Street in Philly. We had primer. Everything we spent money on was to go fast. We didn't have money to build beautiful cars. We built fast cars.
That's where I was. That's my, you know. But the point is, we had knowledge of other brands. We had respect for other brands.
Right.
But that ended with that fragmentation in the magazine.
I don't know if it ended. I think it simply solidified it. I think it was already calcifying. It just solidified it.
You're probably right. But let's go over. You've sent over. You've scanned a bunch of stuff, and
I did.
What I'm going to do is we're just going to randomly go through them, and let's talk about each of these. So we'll have the lovely Kathy. Kat, say hi. Look.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Kathy.
You can wave at the people.
I'm
There's,
wait, hang on.
There's Kathy's hand.
Here's
Okay.
my hands. I'm trying to see the screen. Hang on. So I can do this.
Okay.
I'm squinting. Okay. Okay.
So.
Share.
All right. Share.
Okay.
All right. So here we go. Okay.
Drag
So I'm at the swap meet at Maple Grove. This guy has showed up with a box of magazines. Now, at that point, you go to a swap meet, and the magazines were 50 cents a piece. These were $5 each. But they were basically Brett's from 1965. That is brand new in the paper wrapper. Okay. And that day, I became a true magazine collector. I think I spent $60 or $80 with him. And I have kept them ever since. This had to have been probably 90 or 91. And,
all right, now I got to say something. I got to get in here for a minute, right?
Yeah.
So when these magazines came out, 1966, 1967, 1968, I was only 52, okay, and I was 3, 4, 5, 6 years old when these magazines were on the stand.
Right.
There were newsstands. I was in Brooklyn. I was raised in Brooklyn my younger years, and there were newsstands everywhere. And I used to, I would do whatever I had to do to get my parents, my grandparents, anybody to buy me these magazines. I couldn't read.
Right.
4 or 5 years old. But I was so bent on trying to understand what it said under the pictures that I taught myself how to read with these magazines. Like probably
that's awesome.
Copy.
You know, it's funny when I was dating my wife, she took magazines and she used them. She was tutoring kids at that time privately, and she used my magazines to tutor these kids. And their parents weren't overly thrilled about the fact that this crazy motorhead was like, you know, having an influence on their children. But maybe they all grew up to be like me. I don't know. So what you're looking at in this picture is one of the 2-page spreads in one of Peterson's funny car pictorials. They did 3 of these over the course of 3 years, 1970, 71, and 72. And really, they're rare today. They're hard to come by because a lot of guys tore them up and hung the pictures on the wall.
On the walls.
Yeah. But to find a good, solid bound one is nice. The earliest ones, all the captions are written on the front and back cover inside. So the pictures are just sitting there. And I can't really see that real well, but I look like I'm looking at
it's Roger Lindemood's car.
It's Lindemood's 68 car with the psychedelic paint job, and maybe that's Poldy in the Corvair below it.
It's not. No, it's not Poldy. I can't make out. It's an unknown car. I can't make. I've never.
Well,
seen.
Every car that showed up in those things had some kind of notoriety at that point. I'm sure. I'm drawing a blank on the Corvair guys right now. Is there a blower on it? Yeah,
it's a blower, and it's got a Hillborn 4-port.
Oh, it might have been who's the guy who ran the big number at Indy, the 767 at Indy in 67.
No, might be. The name escapes me.
I've forgotten more than I remember now, man. I don't remember, but
the thing
anyway.
the thing about looking at these pictures, right, is you see the contrast between the way cars today, drag cars, funny cars, are presented today, and they were back then. This stuff.
Well, yeah, but you have to remember some of that stuff was based on the increasing speeds. You know, you get up to speed in some of that square-bodied stuff, and you know that was a terrifying thing. I mean, Sharpman told me that, you know, he talked NHRA to let him put a spoiler on the Comet. They were not allowed, and he said the back end was just floating all over the place, and he finally got the okay to do it. So, you know, I mean, some of that styling stuff was based on.
It's not so much the styling. It's the paint. It's the polish. It's the chrome.
I agree. You know, yeah, there's no big sponsor names on any of this stuff. So
these cars had class.
Yeah, thank Tom McEwen and Tire Inductivity Booster for that. and the Hayden Profit and that piston ring deal he had in '67, the Grant piston ring special or whatever it was.
And then the AMC, the Rebel.
Yeah. So here we've got looks like the Hawaiian and a Challenger up top. I can't really.
The Ram Chargers versus Mazamanian.
Oh, it is the Ram Chargers car. Okay, very cool. Well, you know, as part of my career, I've collected a lot of older slides. I've got slides of some of these cars actually in my own collection, so it's kind of come full circle that way. But yeah, those Peterson pictorials, the funny car ones are the toughest, and then the drag racing ones, and then the hot rod ones. And you were talking earlier that they were expensive. I mean, that was the thing is, you know, we think like, well, the magazine was $2. Well, $2 was real money. You know, your hourly wage was $4. So,
you know, when I started buying magazines myself in 1969, 1970, they were 50 cents.
Right.
And that was a lot of money for, you know, an 8-year-old kid to come up with.
Sure.
4 or 5 times a month because you had to buy each of those titles. So I got buying Hot Rod Carcross, Superstock, Drag Racing USA, Popular Hot Rodding, which was never my favorite. Popular Hot Rodding was always my last choice, right? Always.
Well, yeah, because you bought it for Reyes's photography. There wasn't much else in there.
Reyes was fantastic.
But you bought it to see where Reyes had been that month to see somebody blow his stuff up. That's why you bought Popular Hot Rod.
But at any rate, those pictorials were like $2, which was unobtainable to a kid. You know, I guess as an 8-year-old kid, right? But we got somebody over here. Mike Brown is asking what you thought of. Did you know Gray Baskerville?
What about Gray Baskerville?
Mike Brown is asking, Jeff, what did you think of Gray Baskerville? Dad.
Well, I think that, you know, he was somebody who represented the hot rod industry. But I think that in some ways he didn't have a clue. You know, you'd have to talk to Magneto about some of that stuff. He knows more about it than I do. But I know that, you know, that Gray actually had kind of calcified to solidified into that position, and he was pretty unmovable in some of the things that he thought and believed. And you know, I think he was a true tribute to the whole hot rodding industry, though. He was not somebody I personally knew.
Gray got me in the door at Hot Rod. I did some work for Ro McGonigal when he was the editor.
Did you?
Yeah.
Now, Ro was one of my heroes. That was the other cool thing about when I started doing my nostalgia thing. I got to meet Jim McCraw. I got to meet Collison. I got to meet Ro. I hung out with Tinsley. I've hung out with Reyes. I hung out with McClurg. All the guys who were like my heroes shooting the photos we're looking at here, I'm showing up 20 years later. And because at that point, I really could retain a huge amount of information. I could talk about this event. Oh yeah, that was 1973 at Lakeland or whatever. And they'd be kind of blown away that I had that kind of recall. But a lot of that was just, I was soaking in this stuff. I saturated myself with this. When I worked at the bank at night, I'd bring a stack of magazines in every night and just read and read and read. When I worked in production control, so I filed reports and stuff. And they needed somebody to just basically make sure they were there during the nighttime. So I had time to do all kinds of stuff. And, you know, so it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool to know all those guys. So yeah, I'm not knocking Gray. I didn't really know him. I know that he and Stevie Maggs had a little bit of an issue toward the end there. But you know, he was an icon in the magazine world.
He was one of the few professionals that would actually take my phone calls.
Is that right?
Yeah. Well, remember back when I was doing Cars Illustrated, I really was a street racing punk.
I know. Well, here's the thing, Tony. I mean, that reputation preceded you. Everybody was kind of like, you know, this guy's going to get us all put in jail.
I wasn't that well. Okay, I was that bad. All right, so go ahead. Go to the next one. All
right, so here we got Rich Cerunian and Big John's Cuda doing that wheel stand. I'm not sure if that was the 70 or 71 race at Pomona, but I got to tell you, I worked for years to try to get a photo like this, and I finally figured it out. And you cannot do it any place that's got concrete guardrails. There are guys doing it now by remote, but that's not really honest. So I was at Beaver Springs, and Beaver Bob and I got along real well. And the original Super Stock AMX of Lou Downing had shown up for one of Darwin Dahl's York Nostalgia races, and he was running the car. He was going rounds on Sunday. He had gone like 4 rounds. And I said, Lou, here's the deal. I'm going to lay on the apron of the racetrack to shoot under the car. And I said, if you get sideways, do whatever you can to point it toward the Christmas tree, because if you don't, you're going to kill me. But I got the photo. I was happy with it. But I worked for years to try to get a photo like that.
See, now I tried to get pictures like that. Not just like that, but the photographers, Peterson's photographers back then, right? Or the West Coast photographers, I should say, were just off the chain good. These guys were really creative.
Well, they were, because here's the thing. You got to remember, Peterson did photographic. You know, you didn't get in a Peterson photography location / job without being that good. I'm trying to think. Somebody was telling me that one of the guys, maybe Pat Bollier, but one of the guys went into Ronald Reagan's house, you know, while he was president, and he got in there and got to talk to him about something or another as a photographer and as a gun guy, and somebody came out, and the Secret Service guy said, we don't really understand what your role is, but Casper Weinberger doesn't go in there. So it was pretty cool. But yeah, you had to be good to be a Peterson photographer.
So I tried to emulate some of this stuff like you did. And so Norman Blake and I put out 2 issues of a magazine called Drag Racing Illustrated. Same time.
Yeah, there's a picture of it in that stuff I sent Kathy. Yeah.
Okay. So I did a feature on Frank Bradley's car. Okay. And that was one of those races where I was both with a car and doing magazines at the same time. And which was weird, you know, because I'd be in the photographer's area, which was covered in oil, you know what I mean? Because as soon as we're done shooting this round, I got to get back to work on the car, whatever it happened to do.
Right.
But at any rate, Bradley had blown up like 5 motors in a row. So we were hanging out afterwards, and he was going to light the car and just do a quick shot across the pits. There was nobody around now. So I says, you know what? I'm going to get a Peterson-like shot of this. So I grabbed the camera, right? And I put the camera right next to where he was going to do the burnout.
Right.
Like literally, like he was, and I shot down like this, and we published a couple of the pictures, but he was so close that as he passed, the wing brushed my shoulder.
Yeah.
Anything to get the picture. You know what I mean? Anything to get the picture.
Oh yeah. No, we and you did. I mean, you did whatever it took to try to get that shot, and that still goes on today. You know, if you're going to be, I mean, again, I'm 60 years old now, so I don't do the crazy stuff I used to do. But you know, I went around Talladega at 90 miles an hour in the back of the fire truck with a NASCAR prototype Charger. It was an Intrepid. It was a NASCAR program in 2000 at 90 miles an hour with it right based.
Oh, you froze.
Thinking and doing that. So yeah, there's stuff I won't do anymore that I used to do, but it was fun while it lasted.
All right, here's the next picture.
All right, so obviously this was the first funny car pictorial, Jungle's 69 car on the cover. Claire Sanders had won the Pomona race with his version of this car, and they've both been found and restored now. Is that
Jungle's or Claire's
I don't know if that's Jungle or Claire in there. No, it based on you know, the fact that Peterson understood the selling of what Jungle Jim meant to sales. I mean, he was already a hero by that point. It probably is Jungle.
Okay. All right, next one.
So now we're inside. Kathy, there's another photo that shows a picture of a clown. It should be close to this one. Sorry, I guess go back. We'll see it in a minute. Go ahead and go back to the center spread. So you were talking about stuff you'd publish in magazines. One of the coolest things was Superstock and Drag Illustrated ran this awards section every year in February. and it talked about all the craziest stuff. We gave an award for, like, I think there's Joe Winters blowing a body off there.
Yep.
And, you know, it's just, you know, it was the award for, you know, the acrobatic award of the Loving Cup or whatever. And it told a lot of stuff that you didn't hear about in the regular news stories. You would find out, oh, so that's what happened, you know, and they made use of some of the creative photography these guys were doing. So at that point, I think Lovett had already gone on to Dragsters. So that would have been stuff by Tinsley, McClurg and Asher and the other photographers who were on the tour at that point, Reyes. So there's a very interesting picture, an interesting car. If you guys who are watching this, you look at the top of the right page, picture on the left-hand side, there's a twin-engine car there, right? And that was actually that was Jim Busby. Guy had a lot of loot. And yeah, can you go bigger on it? Yeah. So is that the one that had the Indy Eagles in it?
Yeah, it had two Indy motors. They were $30,000 each in 1970.
Oh yeah, it was crazy, and I don't think it made that many laps. But again, the caption under that, I don't know how far you can blow that up, Kathy. I'm sure the caption has something fairly hilarious about what happened there. But
oh, okay, wait, I was wrong. They were $35,000 each.
Right.
With the four dual overhead cam Indy engines, and it didn't run like at all.
No. Yeah, you found out pretty quick. The guys like the Freight Train and the other people running dual motors at that time, they'd figured this stuff out. There was no beginner's luck left in that deal. You know.
What's the next one?
Yeah, but anyway, that was my favorite section when I was buying old magazines. So we were talking about, you know, the death of magazines. Well, here was McCraw's cover, Our Supercar's Dead, and they were talking about the fact that the insurance companies and the muscle car compression ratios and everything was kind of changing. This was late 1970 or 71, and you know, so they again creative photography. They're putting the muscle car in the grave there, and
so with this cover, I remembered this cover.
Yeah,
it stuck with me. And when I was doing, I don't remember which magazine it was. I did a road test, drag test on the last Fiero, and it was legitimately the last Fiero. It was a press pool. It was the last one, and I shot the lead for that in a cemetery.
Okay.
In front of a tombstone, and this picture was my inspiration for that.
Yeah. Well, and again, at that point, you know, just like when you're young, you know, you live to find that creative place, you know, and Tinsley really was my hero and my mentor, because when I first met him, it was ironically, he had gone to work for the Smithsonian. He had done some railroad photography at a place in Western Pennsylvania called East Broad Top. I was in Garlett's office, and Garlett said, well, Tinsley's here. And I hadn't met him. I said, are you Geoff Tinsley? That Geoff Tinsley, like from Superstock? And you know, we ended up hanging out together, and we had a great time doing stuff together. And I keep in touch with his wife, Beth, once in a while. But he was a good guy. But he was all about finding that edge. What was the thing that was going to make the photo creative?
You know, that brain trust, that creative brain trust. And if you had to pinpoint it, right, it would be the post Terry Cook years. Terry Cook started it, right? But the post
Terry Cook was actually the guy without the filter who kind of showed you could get away with doing this stuff. Right. But you had to balance the reality of the professional editorship with kind of the craziness of the moment people were in. Let's be honest. I mean, the whole culture was going a little sideways right then. There was some chemical stuff going on, and you know, people were on the road and running around like crazy. But
that's where like college
is you needed your McCraws, your Raffas, your McGonagals, your guys who could you know, sit with Vince Piggins and drink 3 martinis at lunch and still talk cars afterward. And you had to have the guys who kind of and Cook really put his finger on the pulse of the car culture. Yep. It was sort of more like cartoons than it was anything real serious. And we could poke fun at each other and at ourselves, and you know, but it was hilarious, some of the stuff these guys would do. And you know, in Ehrenberg, and I don't know how much of that you were involved in the mid-90s, there's still people who haven't forgiven him for cutting that Imperial up. There's still people pissed about that.
Oh, yeah. So Carlson told me a story about this period of time, that Carcraft magazine, 1970, 1971, 72, 73.
So that's when McCraw was. That was when McCraw was in the saddle, and McGonigal would take over after him.
Right. And Carlson told me
not McCraw. I mean Terry Cook. Terry Cook was in the saddle in that 70 to 71 period there.
Yeah, Terry Cook was 68, I think 68 or 69 until right. But at any rate, he told me he went on when he first went on staff there. They would indulge in stuff for lunch, and they got the bright idea to climb into the vent system. They had a big vent thing, so they climbed into the vent system and they got lost in the building in the vents. He thought he was going to die in there.
Yeah. I know one publisher who remained anonymous and one drag racer who remained anonymous, and they decided the little angel dust at lunch was going to help them out, and they ended up going up Will South Boulevard backward, and this was a big name guy in both cases, and hey, it was the 70s, and I think a lot of stuff in the 70s probably should stay there. I don't know if the statute of limitations have run out on everything.
All right, what's the next one?
Okay, so now we're into the great Reyes stuff here, and Reyes was, this is hot rodding in action. So he basically was on retainer with Popular Hot Rodding, and that was what they had. I mean, like you were saying, it was the last choice in a lot of cases, but you always knew Reyes would find a way to find something. And once a year they would do this hot rodding in action stuff, and it was classic drag racing mayhem and cool stuff like that. So yeah, again, another magazine that's tough to come by.
That's Flip Schofield in the dragster, right?
I can't see it real close here, but yeah, probably is.
Yeah,
probably is. And obviously, once again, Jungle on the cover in the lower. At this point, Pam was on tour with him. That's the 72 car. So that magazine is probably done in 73 or 74.
Yeah, 73. I wonder if he had the record for magazine covers.
Who, Reyes?
No, Jungle.
Oh, probably. Yeah, I mean, you have to look at him as the quintessential funny car guy. When I did Quarter Mile Stones, I remember, we talked about Jungle. I mean, this was a 16-page magazine. Probably once every other issue, there'd be something. At that point, even then, Jungle handouts were the most expensive. And, and so, yeah, it was that he,
bro, it's
kind of like, it's this James Dean thing. He died before the money got stupid. When I was working on my funny car manuscript that I did more recently, I wanted to do Shrill Greer as my quintessential funny car guy because he won the world championship the last year before Prudhomme showed up with the big money and the Winston
burns on his hands.
But the bottom line is Jungle knew how to put the show on. He'd show up late. He'd do a burnout to the end of the racetrack. He had he had Pam backing him up after Bobby. And, it was the whole thing was it was everything you wanted to be if you thought you could pull this deal off. And nobody else could pull it off. Only Jungle could do that.
I've told this story before, right? But since we're on the subject where you're pushing, steering it, I'm
steering into the guardrail, brother. You're supposed to reel me back in.
No, man. This is your show. This is your
shattering the tires.
When I was working for Collison, he wanted me to do something with Beswick. So I went out to the farm and I stayed on Beswick's farm for a weekend.
Okay. Yeah.
So we did the story. We did everything we were going to do. And now he's showing me all of this memorabilia that he has. And we're just sitting around talking. Okay.
Yeah.
So he says, come on, I got to show you something. So we go out to this outbuilding, right? That was part of the old barn before it burned down.
Yeah.
Part of that complex. So he got to this old outbuilding and he says, hey, wait here, right? So, downstairs. So he climbs up into this crawl space and he comes back down and he's got a yellow fire bottle, a yellow Halon bottle. And he hands it to me, right? And he says, that was Jungle's.
Ah, no kidding.
Yeah. So that's the impression that the guy left on the people he was racing with.
Well, and Roe did that thing in Hot Rod that kind of really summarized, the reality of it. But I think, we all love the idea that here was a guy who basically was living the life. He had the beautiful girlfriend. He had the fast car. Everybody wanted to be him. I mean, that was the whole thing. You know, we all kind of wanted to be in that position. And, you know, and again, he was too cool for school. So you talk to guys like Reyes, or you talk to Tinsley, you know, and, you know, before he passed on, he had great stories about these guys, and nothing too insane, but, you know, again, the 70s were the 70s. There was a lot of stuff that went on that, you know, it's a good thing they didn't have cell phones. So
the amazing
imagine a
thing
world without cell phones.
What people can't really today's, you know, we talk about these things. We're old, so we understand what the dynamics were back in the day. But it's hard for people to wrap their heads around that he only won one NHRA national event. It's like
but he could book 2 cars anywhere in the country 5 days a week. I mean, this was the whole thing. If you look at that car there, he got some money for Revell for the models, and he had an oil deal. And that car ate the money it got on the road. And Jungle didn't, you know, he didn't die rich. You know, the old adage is, if you want to be really rich, start out drag racing very rich, and you'll become less rich. Well, Jungle started with basically nothing. He ran the car on nothing, and he still made it work. And I think everybody loved the underhero deal about that. And, you know, again, the guys who were on tour in the media business, the magazine photographers, you know, if they were kind of in with that funny car crowd, you know, you were running that same 5 nights a week too. I mean, you were chasing the caravan to the Fleabag hotels and eating the last egg or whatever. And, you know, and then it was back home basically to sleep for 48 hours and get the car refurbished and start it all over again. So
after I had quit drag racing, period, I was done right after the incident at Leicester.
Yeah.
I'm doing other things, and Nick Bonenfant, remember Nick?
Yeah, oh, I knew Nick, yeah.
Nick Bonenfant calls me up and he says, I got a deal for you if you want to take it. And I was like very hesitant. I'm like, you know, he says, there's backing for this, right? Jungle's kid, he had just found Jungle's kid, Randy.
Yeah, Randy, yeah.
Okay. And he had been taking him around to all of these races. It was like a trophy. It was like, and he would make him talk because Randy had that same kind of squeaky voice that his father did, right?
Yeah.
So it was cute. It was like Randy was Nick's like show and tell thing. So a couple of years go by, right? And Nick lines up a deal where Revell is going to cut a check for a tribute car and to run the car. And Nick wanted me to run, not drive it. We're going to put the kid in the car. We're going to put Randy in the car.
Yeah.
And I was going to tune it. So I went and I leased a shop. Do you remember this? You don't remember this? The shop on Amboy Road?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
I went and I leased a shop. Like, this is how solid this thing was.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
And
were you still up in the Northeast then?
I was still in New York City. It was about 3 years before I moved down here.
And Bonifant was out of Allentown or something, right?
He was not Allentown. Oh God, Westchester.
Okay, well, that's where Jungle had been at.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So, at any rate, make a long story short, Bobby, who was Jungle's first wife, Randy's mother.
Yeah.
They're telling me, she called me. She says, "Don't get involved with this kid." She says, "I love him. He's my son, but don't get involved with him." And I was like, but Nick says it's all good and the check is cleared and everything else. She says, "You'll see." He spent it all. I had a chassis lined up. I had a body lined up. I was starting to accumulate.
Yeah, well, you know, like I said, if you want the whole story, get Rose McGonigal's hot rod feature called "Goodnight Celestial One," and kind of get the bigger picture of what was going on there.
I know, but yeah, that was my last hurrah with nitro cars was getting screwed on a Jungle Gym tribute.
Well, now that's a good story to have, though. If you're going to have a story to talk about ending, that's a good story to have.
Go on a blaze of confusion is what I think.
Right.
Everybody that you see them.
I see them. Yes. Okay. Kathy's reminding me. We have our own. So Geoff, you have to understand. We do these lives. We do lives twice a week. We do one on Sunday night and we do one on Wednesday night. And our viewers that are here with us right now are our regulars. Like there's a couple hundred of them that are in all of the, and so they're our family. They're the UTG family.
Okay, cool.
So, and we got zero. Wait till you see the package Kathy's sending to you. She just dropped it in the mail. So anyway, these are the UTG family. And once you get rolling with YouTube and you start doing your own lives and all of that, you're going to develop that same thing. So
well, you need to put UTG Army underneath there. UTG Militia. That's what you need to have on that.
There you go. Well,
and no other explanation. Just make people explain what it is. I think it'd be pretty fun.
I'm not quite as nutty as I used to be. I'm not the same person, Geoff.
The world wasn't ready for it. Like you said earlier before we got on. You know, we both managed to live to get to be this old, and that's been, you know, for me, God's good grace and the reality that I was able to do what I loved for my career. So, you know, it's great.
So at any rate, I just want to recognize all of our fans here, our fans, and they're not fans. These are our viewers. This is our family here, and our mods. Mexican Spec, Zero. These guys keep a rein on stuff. You know, you get the trolls pop in, they squash them, they keep the conversation rolling. These guys are fantastic. So
good deal.
Everybody, I'm not ignoring you on purpose. It's just a typical thing. He and I are catching up, and it's just all right. Well, look, just letting you know, these are our people here.
Cool.
And they're your people too. And guys, if you're just joining us now, Geoff has just kicked off his YouTube channel. It's Geoff Stunkard, Zookeeper. What?
Zookeeper's Diary.
Zookeeper's Diary.
Right.
And so go over there and give him a sub and start checking out his videos. He's going to be putting out a lot of content. He's got the gift of gab. He does.
Yeah, that I do have. Yeah. I'm surprised you haven't hooked me off the stage yet.
I love you, man. Don't worry about it.
So check it out. So here's it. That looks like it's either Perdome or Bruce Larson doing a monster fire burnout.
Yep.
And then somebody's launching the fuel motor at Ontario below it.
That's Gary Beck.
Okay.
That's Gary Beck.
Yeah, that might have been at Indy. I'm looking. I can't really see the finish line there, but yeah, he's got one lit off. And then is that Lombardo and Grumpy's Nova at the top?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
so this is a popular hot rodding yearbook. Now, what was great about these, when I researched my book on Dick Landy, when I researched my book on the Motown Missile, these were great resources to get some of the backstory on what was going on at each of the events. Now, they didn't cover every event, but instead of going back to every magazine, it was a summary. And sometimes there was more photography in the stories in the drag racing yearbook than there would be in the regular magazine issues. So yeah, they're pretty useful from that standpoint. But yeah, it was cool to see. Of course, one big race every year was the popular Hot Rodding Nationals up in Martin, Michigan. So there's the cover of a 1970 Sox and Martin catalog mailer. And, it's not really a magazine, but it'd be one of those things if you're looking at magazines as a magazine collector. I mean, it's a big deal to find a real Sox and Martin anything. And that's the actual, I think it's the first catalog they did that had all their retail parts in it.
Let's do another one on Mopar memorabilia and stuff like that, because we could go forever on that too. I just want to stick to the magazines for tonight.
All right, let's go. Okay, and a program from 71 at Daytona showing Pete Hamilton and the Superbird having won in 1970. So yeah, it's not a magazine thing, but again, it's a periodical programs every year. So we'll go to the next one. So this is a snippet of that February 1969 cover test on Superstock. One image showed John Mulligan, Top Fuel Car, and Mulligan, of course, got killed at Indy later that year. And the other one showed a Mercury Cyclone, road test. And we're just trying to figure out what would work. So
so let's talk about this for 1 second, right?
Yeah.
So your channel, the Zookeeper, right?
Yeah, Mulligan was the Zookeeper too.
Yeah, Mulligan was the original Zookeeper.
Yes, he was.
And he was named that because at the time you had the wildlife racing team of the snake and the mongoose, Prudhomme and McEwen, right?
Well, it wasn't even just that. The wildlife racing team came around after this.
Afterwards.
He was the Zookeeper because the promoters. I'm trying to think. There was a wombat, or there were several animals there were several named guys who.
Yeah, Prudhomme and McEwen had those names before wildlife racing. They were using those nicknames.
Correct. And so Mulligan came in and said, well, I'm going to take care of all these guys. I'll be the zookeeper. So again, you look back at some of the screamer ads from the late 60s when they were talking about it, they'd go back and forth, and it's kind of like pro wrestling was in some regards. And but Mulligan took on the zookeeper name because there were a number of animal names in that menagerie they were involved in. And of course, Jerry the King, Jerry came out of the Northwest and called himself the King. And McCullough said, "Oh yeah, well I'm the ace," So it was a great time, I think, when you think about drag racing history in that regard.
This car. So this is the last picture of, and the last time this car was run with an early Chrysler with a 392.
Oh, that might well be so. That might well be so.
I know that. Please, I know the whole history of this very well because and I'll explain it at another time, right? But just for Mopar trivia's sake,
yeah,
this was the last run of the car, the last outing of the car with the early Chrysler.
Okay.
They put a 426 in the car.
Right.
All right. But between the time that this was taken and Indy, they ran it a couple of times to test it and then brought it to Indy. Now, what happened was they had used the same motor plate for the Chrysler, for the early Chrysler, as they did for the 426.
Okay, that would make sense. I mean, they were low bug. That was not a big bug team. That was a low bug team.
Well, the motor plate didn't fit the profile of the 426.
Right, correct.
The 392.
Yeah.
So he put a rod bolt through the oil pan at Indy.
Yeah.
And because of the way the 426 fit the motor plate on there, instead of the fire just going around them, it came through the motor plate.
Oh yeah, no, it was a horrible fire. Yeah.
But the fire something
told me that there were a lot of guys mixing up. They were using benzene. There was a little bit of hydrazine, but that was kind of the swan song for that. They blew a ton of stuff up and threw clutches into the crowd. I mean, that was 69 Nationals was kind of a dark day, from the standpoint of the stuff not working the way it should have. I would correct you on one thing. I'm pretty sure that photo, I think Lovett took it, and I'm thinking that was at the World Finals in '68, which would have been that year in probably Dallas, first
November.
year at Dallas, yeah, or in Tulsa. But the bottom line was, I'm pretty sure. I'd have to look at the picture closer. But you can tell because the windscreen changed too when they swapped the motor out. I cropped it too tight. I wanted to show the February date. And that was why I cropped it that tight. But there's a photo in there that shows both magazines together. Maybe we can zoom in on that. Okay. But that photo, it's a February '69 cover date. It would have been shot sometime in late '68. So, and I know they ran Pomona and some other races because I've got some pictures of it. So anyway, let's go on to, I'm not sure who this is. I think this is one of Mike Daugherty's drag racing photo greats. Reyes supplied a lot of stuff for this. Rick Welch up in the Northwest supplied stuff for it. So yeah.
All right, what's the next one?
And then I was telling you earlier, Mike Daugherty published this Here's Linda magazine with these kind of risque pictures of Linda Vaughn, and the story was that she basically sued him because it was done without her permission. So that's I don't have a copy of it. But that Here's Linda magazine is pretty tough to come by.
I always thought Nikki Phillips was better.
Yeah, I think that's true. Nikki's still around. She's on Facebook.
Is she?
Yeah, and so I'm trying to think.
Who is this? That's
I think that's new. That's the New Englander, isn't it?
It's Grant Stroms.
Yeah, Stroms. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this was a magazine. This was a magazine that Norman Blake self-published in 1974 with another couple of photographers, and they had no distribution, and they tried real hard to sell them. And he told me they left a bunch. Maybe Dave McCarrick told me, but they left a bunch of them at a country store up at Epping because nobody wanted them. So. But it's cool because there's a lot of photography in this magazine that didn't show up in any of the racing newspapers or any of the racing magazines. So most of it Northeast. It's Epping, it's Atco, it's Englishtown, Maple Grove. So
this car, they used to run this out of a gas station.
yeah.
Or out of a Route 9. And they would test the car on the street.
Well, maybe that's the car when Bruce Springsteen was singing about sprung from whatever it is on Highway 9, you know. So,
Possibly. But yeah, they would test that dragster on the street.
That's cool, man. Yeah, I know that Freddie Faulkner used to test his on the street in Wilmington. I heard stories about that. This is the back cover of that same magazine. I'm thinking this might have been Ron Leaf, but it's somebody's Vega, and they are in the woods at Epping at the end of the track, shoot failure, and stuff happens one of those days. It's going to be a long night.
That's the Swenson and Lanny Vega. It's Arnie Swenson, who was a friend of mine.
Yeah.
And
is that what that is? Is that Swenson and Lonnie?
Yeah, but that was after a fire. He ran into the woods, but that wasn't the fire that got him. Well, he didn't get killed or anything, but he was in the hospital for like a year. He could never.
He was driving the car when this happened, or before this?
Yeah, that was Arnie Swenson.
Okay.
And that was originally Ron Leaf's Vega.
Okay, so
that was Ron Leaf's Vega. Lagana drove that car.
Is that right?
Yes. And then it ended up at Swenson and Lanny. They rebodied it after this, and then he had another fire. That put him in the hospital for like about a year, and then he could never wear a short sleeve shirt again.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, because of the sun.
Yeah. Yeah, well, like I said, some of these lessons got learned pretty hard, man. And that's again the inside at Pat Musey's Speed Shop as the advertisement, right? And again, a few cars on the other side there, just doing their thing.
So the younger guys know the Street Outlaws and all of that. Lizzie Musey, that's her dad.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. There's I think is that Shirley on Fire at the bottom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cha-Cha Getting Hot.
Yeah. That might. I think Blake took that from the tower at Indy. I think Reyes took a couple of photos of it. I know that was a pretty bad fire if I remember right. So, but anyway, like I said, the quality of the print is a little rough, but it's still cool to have. And there's Jungle Pam, and I'm trying to think at the top. There's a fuel motor that got fragged at the top.
No, it's a burnout, but this was actually Prudhomme's car. You can see the
is that Jacona? Yeah, Joe Jacona and I were pretty good buddies before he passed on. I did a big story on him for Hot Rod at the St. Louis Funny Car Reunion in 2004. Yeah, he was a good guy. He was fun to hang out with.
He was a wild man.
Yeah, he was a wild man, but he realized as time went on, he was pushing the odds. I remember talking to Jay Howell at Gainesville a couple of years ago, and I remember him telling me, I said, well, you drove Prudhomme's funny car at Indy and just kind of quit. He said, well, 3 or 4 of my buddies had gotten killed, and he said, I had 4 kids. I had to stop racing. And you kind of got a better picture of, we were pushing the envelope, and Joe was a wild man. He was part of that whole East Cruise crew, and with Arrington and Jungle and those guys. So, yeah, they lived a little crazy.
The Rolling Stoned.
Yep.
All right, what's the next one?
So, what do you think of this?
Okay.
This is the one and only issue of Hot Rotor. This was printed up just like a Peterson pictorial. It's all color photos, and all of it is pictures of Gene Eubanks or Gene Middlebrook's Turbonique dragster and funny car buildups and all that rocket stuff. So this whole issue is nothing but color pictures of that. And the newsstand distribution, I don't even think there was any. I think Gene just paid Peterson whatever the amount of money it was to print these up. And they're hard to come by, but that's all the color rocket photography on Turbonique is in that 164-page magazine.
All right, what's the next one here?
There you go. So there's some Turbonique motors, different horsepowers, and so you can see if you were really wanting pictures of colorful funny cars, this thing was not up your alley. But I think these were the catalog. He'd send a catalog out with the paperwork on what you were buying, and then this was a pictorial that went with it.
That's, you know, it wasn't. People look at the Turbonique thing as like it was a fly-by-night operation, but it really wasn't.
No.
He was serious.
Oh yeah, no, and again, he saw it as an alternative to the expense of buying and building fuel motors or race car motors. Look, you can put this thing together, and as long as you do it exactly like we say, it's harmless. Well, you know as well as I do, you know, drag racers, you read the directions after you've tried it and it didn't work. With a freaking rocket car, yeah, there's only one chance. There's no second gimmies on it. So you hear people setting, you know, running these go-karts and they set the street on fire behind them because raw fuel came out and luckily it didn't blow up.
Okay,
you know, and then obviously, you know, if you weren't paying attention, you were in trouble.
We're going to jump in here for a minute because you and I know Turbonique. Okay,
yeah.
We've got this guy Josh Hammond. He says hot rotor, rather odd name for a car publication. Well, okay, that was only for the Turbonique cars, and the rotor.
That's correct. That was just one issue. That was one single issue. It was not a periodical. Wasn't a yearly or anything. They printed that up one time, and like I said, I think the owner of the company, Gene Meadowbrook, he went ahead and paid Peterson to do that. I don't think that was something they would have risked money.
I want to explain about the rotor part. These were turbines. These were rocket propelled
with
turbines.
Actual rocket fuel you could buy and use in your own garage.
Yeah. Anybody could go and buy a rocket powered drag axle.
It would create a sonic sound if you were not careful. It would shatter windows and do everything a rocket would do.
Yeah. So people would take these, like a regular stock muscle car, okay, whatever car from the era, completely stock, bolt a Turbonique drag axle to it, right? A rocket powered turbine, and run single digit quarter miles.
Right. You could take the rear cover off of your 12-volt Chevy, and you could fab this thing and get it put on there. Basically, working with the regular way the differential was set up, and you just had to make sure the car could freewheel. So,
yeah, you could just drive these things like a normal car, and then when you hit the button, wow, like 10,000.
As long as the mixture of thermaline and oxygen were exactly proportional to what they need to be, because if they weren't, you had a bigger problem.
Yeah, and the fuel was called thermaline.
Yep.
All right, so what do we got? What's the next one? Okay.
So these are the three color pictorials that Peterson did in 70, 71, and 72. Each one covered the prior year. So the 70 issue has the 69 cars, 71 issue 70 cars, the 72 issue 71 cars. But yeah, it was a pretty cool batch of stuff.
Okay.
And here's the center spread of I think one of the Argus specials, but that's Jungle's red Camaro doing a classic fire burnout, and I've got my own stories of that. The most famous photo of my career was a fire burnout, and it's funny. I talked to Tinsley. He was telling me about the photo that ended up on the cover of the Revell box, and he got pretty concerned because they were at either MIR or Capitol, and they'd put a lot of fuel down to start that fire burnout. And Geoff had said, well, look, this is for the model cover box, and we got to make sure it's right. So Jungle's sitting there, and I mean, this fire is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And finally he pulls out of it. And Tinsley said, went up to Jungle after he actually made a run after that. He said, what did you do? He said, well, you said you needed a fire big enough to make this cover. And I just waited till my butt got so hot I couldn't stand it. Threw the fire suit before I pulled out. But that's that giant fire burnout that showed up on the cover of the Revell model box. This is a little earlier. This is the red Camaro doing a fire burnout.
Who shot the Brand X Mustang fire burnout for Carcraft? Do you know?
Who shot which burnout?
The Brand X Mustang.
Oh, Asher did that.
Asher did that?
John Asher did that. And then Asher drove the car and caught it on fire, testing in Gainesville after the race in 72. Right. Yeah. Yeah, in fact, Asher was the one that Brian Coleman called about me doing when we did the fire burnout with the Bell Dodge. Asher was the one who gave him the pointers to make sure we didn't burn the car to the ground.
Yeah, Asher did the story in Superstock and Drag Illustrated. I drove a funny car on fire.
That's the one. Yep. So again, back to the Superstock Awards.
Get involved with fuel cars, right?
What's that?
It shows you what happens when magazine guys get involved with fuel cars.
Yeah, that's right. You should have learned. You should have saw it. It was writing on the wall, brother. anyway, so again, back to Super Stocks Awards. Tom McEwen got the award for landing the wildlife racing deal with Hot Rod Wheels and doing absolutely nothing with the money besides, build some pretty race cars. He didn't win anything in 1970. And people kind of, they always looked at McEwen like, what's the big deal? But the truth was when it came to winning really important races, McEwen won the last race at Lions. McEwen won the $25,000 at Tulsa in 72. I mean, when it came time to do it, he did it. And obviously the big emotional deal when he won at Indy against Prudhomme in the final at the 25th annual National. So, it's cool stuff.
That was the day after his kid died from leukemia.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No. It was, yeah. But at that point, Prudhomme, he was ruling the roost. I mean, he was running the way Ronnie Sox had run in 71. I mean, it was very, very hard to get around Prudhomme and Brandt and the tune-up they had on that Army car. So
the thing about McEwen was that he was able to make connections with everybody all the time. He had the Ford deal. They had the Super
Mustang. Yeah, right. That's right.
He just threw himself into anything that came along, and he ran it.
And you have to have a natural ability to sell. I mean, you look at the racing newspapers like Drag News or Drag World when Cook was running it, and McEwen was always in the middle of stuff, trying to figure out a way to make money and trying to figure out a way to actually win races. He wasn't a slacker in terms of not wanting to work. He just, it just seemed like there were a lot of days when things just didn't go his way. And, it's like I said, when the chips were down and he needed to pull it out, man, the deal at Lions, people forget that was a huge event when Lions closed. And to win that final race, that was a big deal. And that deal at Tulsa, he and Prudhomme, and if I remember right, they'd gone back and forth to Indy. They'd kind of violated some of the things people were talking about. But the bottom line was when it came time to run on Sunday, and it came to the final round, and McEwen pulled it off. It was $25,000 cash. And each guy was paying like $8,000 to win Indy. So anyway, I just thought it was great that they made this big point. He had landed the Hot Wheels deal with all this money and hadn't won any big races that year.
All right.
And this is the following year. This was again great creative photography, a broken light bulb, talking about Ford canceling their race program. In my racing research, you find out that after Bunky Knudsen got fired and Iacocca came in September of '69, their racing program basically they shut down everything they could at that point. And Sharpman told me he ended up with dealing with them legally because he had a deal for I think for 3 years. They had just signed in '69. They were going to cancel it. He said, I've got all these other sponsors I've signed on. If you guys drop out, I can't make my commitment to them. And they did continue to keep him on the books.
Allegedly, Sharpman allegedly found a wooden case with glass vials of hydrazine.
That's not what happened because I talked to him about it. Here's what happened.
What's the real story?
Yeah, he's in Cleveland. The case reserve is near Cleveland. And at that point, Roy Steffi had been playing around with stuff. They were doing a little bit of it being messed around with. But Sharpman was the first guy to put it in a door car. Okay. There had been a couple of dragster guys puddling with it and injected cars and stuff.
But how did he end up with it?
Well, they gave him some. He went over there and he got some from these guys at Case Western Reserve.
Okay.
And so he had the little vials. That's what he had was little vials.
I know I had one.
They went to Dragway 42 or someplace, and it was a Sunday afternoon, and they went to run the car, and they left one of the vials on the dashboard of the Carrier. When they came back, the windshield was gone. The dash was in the front seat. It had blown up, spontaneously sitting in the heat. And, they found out real quick he couldn't mess with it, but he knew that he could tweak it a little bit. And, a bunch of those guys, again, you wanted to kind of prove your assault. You showed up in the silverized suit with the tongs and the dry ice and you poured that stuff in. Howell told me, it was funny. I was talking to him about running hydrazine too. And he was telling me that, I said, well, I talked to John Lundberg and Lundberg said, you'd put the the stuff in the motor, and the motor be going, brum, 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 and all of a sudden you go, whoomp,
After
whoomp.
the burnout.
And Howell said no. Howell said no, that's not what happened. Howell said you put that stuff in, and the motor went, ouch, oh crap, ow, oh. So
after the burnout, you back the car up. It's 3 drops per gallon. So you got a 10-gallon tank. You just give it a squeeze and you shake it. And a few seconds later, it takes a little bit for it to actually work through the system. But by the time the car is staging, it's just hammering, like like somebody's taking sledgehammers and just beating on the top of the
in fact, it's funny you bring that up. I talked to Tom Hoover. They were running in the Ram Chargers car in '67. He told me that they went back to Highland Park one afternoon in the shop there. They took a sledgehammer. They had a piston that they had run hydrazine in. They put a piston, a brand new Hemi piston in a vise, and hit it with a sledgehammer. And he could not damage it as badly as the hydrazine did. It's amazing that molecularly the metal did not actually just melt apart because of it. And you had to dump it out at the end of the racetrack. You had that 3-gallon tank. The first thing the driver did when he got out, you got that tank and you unconnected it and you dumped that thing out on the ground and you got that stuff out because it turned into explosive jelly within 15 minutes. You mixed it in with the fuel. You didn't keep it in the fuel system.
The hydrazinium salt of methazotic acid. That's the compound that it forms.
Well, you'd be in big trouble.
Yes.
So
go ahead, next. Okay, there's
a full. So these are your 2 covers. So there you see the Mercury on one side, and you see I think Lovett shot that photo of Mulligan at the World Finals in '68. I'm pretty sure that's when it zoom in on a little closer if you can, Kathy. I don't know how big the image was I sent you. I can't tell if the windscreen is clear or metal.
It had no World Series.
Oh, it's got a World. Okay, so yeah, that's the end of the year. Yeah. And the World Finals actually in '68, I think they might have been in Tulsa that year because they went to Dallas in '69. Dallas was the new big track. So that would have been, so anyway, it's a fabulous photograph.
So just going back to aside from this, when I was starting to get involved with nostalgia top fuel cars in the later '90s, because I was bouncing on a bunch of different things. Yeah, I was working with Pete Jensen. So Pete was friends with Mulligan. Okay. And there was a prohibition against using the 426 in any form of nostalgia racing. And that was with the dragsters, and that was a problem, right? Because for me at least, because I had 426 parts, I had 426 expertise. So it's like, okay, I really want to run this shit, but I don't want to have to relearn everything, right? Or rebuy everything. And the reason that they had made that prohibition against the 426 specifically was because of Mulligan's accident. They blamed it on
that could well be. I mean, Garlitz, when I did that video, I did a YouTube video of him. It's got 250,000 views. I did it years and years ago. But, he said that, you never thought about how weak those factory castings were. You couldn't put any spark lead in them. And so, once they had gotten the aftermarket blocks, the Donovan blocks and the stuff like that, it made a huge difference in being able to run a 392 combination. You didn't have to go to a cast iron 426. And then, obviously, Mylodon and then Keith Black went ahead and did the 426 architecture as a fuel motor architecture. But the bottom line was that, the 392, you couldn't squeeze it as hard if you had a factory steel block, obviously. So you could push that 426 a little harder, but it'd be that much more catastrophic when it came apart.
Well, the thing with the 426 is that you can run that much more lead with it. The 92,
the crank was not likely to fall on the racetrack either. You weren't going to strip the motor out of the block and basically get all the parts. It would put a hole in it. And then you got oil and fuel coming through that hole on fire, and you got the blowtorch on until it uses itself up. That sucked. So,
all right.
And there's again the February cover of that issue of Superstock. So they were doing a test to figure out which one would sell on the newsstand. That was the first time they put a fuel dragster on the cover of Superstock. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't think they tried that again. I think that was the only issue that had a fuel car as the major cover story.
All right, so how do we get to the next one?
What do you mean?
That's it for the pictures?
I think we have to go back to the beginning because we didn't start.
All right, we'll unprofessionally scroll all the way back. Go ahead.
No, we can.
Well, hey, Kathy got the Stunkard mix of pictures. There's no organization. It's like a big sloppy mess.
There's no organization to this live either. We're all over the map, as I expected.
But you know what? We'll do it again sometime. You know, people get an idea that we're both crazy, so it's okay.
The idea? I'm not crazy anymore. I am so mellow. You have no idea.
Well, you can see me. I'm not that mellow. So, but that's just, that just comes with the territory. We're talking about my stuff. I'm mellow about other things. But
hang on, I'm trying to see. I can't see the.
Well, you can come over here.
No, it's okay. I got
it. She's camera shy. I want to know how you can be in this business and be camera shy.
Well.
Green.
It's all right. We're the ones that, we're the gray beards who showed up here tonight. So
Okay.
All right. So
so check it out. NASCAR Summer Nationals at Niagara.
Yes. Now a lot of people don't know that. NASCAR.
This is the program from the NASCAR drag racing series. Last year it was run at Niagara Dragway. So pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know NASCAR was actually they tried their hand at sanction. They wanted to give the NHRA a run for the money.
Well, and again, the guys who ran it will tell you that it paid real well compared to NHRA, the NASCAR drag racing. Still, hold that one right there, Kathy. It paid real well. So this next one is actually a newsletter that George Hurst sent to guys in Vietnam. This is a Hurst report, racing report, and it went to the armed forces. You sent your name in, they'd send it to you for free. And I'm trying to think where these came from, but I got a stack of them. I got 7 or 8 of them at one time. And other than that, I've never seen another one. So
is that Gordon Collette on the bottom?
Yeah, that's the 1967 NHRA World Finals at Tulsa.
Okay.
And that's Ed Miller in the Hemi car winning the very first Super Stock World Championship. And Collette won that year too in Top Gas.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, just cool piece of history there. And like I said, it's only a 4-page newsletter. It's not big, but it's neat stuff.
Yeah, but it's the idea, though. He was not only giving the guys over there a taste of home, but also priming them so as soon as they come back,
Well, yeah, and in fact, that's what Extran, after running the Super Stock Nationals in '65, he told me as a lawyer that was the scariest race he was ever at. The car had never wheel stood before. They'd never put nitro in it before. So he really was kind of done. And then he had some other stuff go on in Detroit. He moved to England. But he made a deal with the Marine Corps to do driving demonstrations for guys coming out because there were a lot of guys getting hurt and killed when they came. You got to remember, if you'd gone in '67 and you came back in '69 and you had money, I talked to guys last weekend in Marion, North Carolina. These are guys who were in Vietnam who came back and bought a car the day they got back. That Omaha or that Bahama yellow Roadrunner, the '69 Road. That guy bought that car the day he got back the day after he got back from Vietnam. So, but Extran and talked to the Marine Corps, and the big issue was a lot of these guys, they'd come back, high horsepower car, hadn't driven for a while, they'd get hurt or get killed. And so Extran made this deal for those Mustangs, and he ran them over there, not in the war zone, but like in Okinawa or Tokyo or some of the other places where guys would be coming out, and it was demonstrations to show them how to drive. And he had a couple of Cobra jets he'd let these guys piddle around with too.
That's great.
So, and he did that program for 4 or 5, probably 3 years. And in the last year he did it, it was Mavericks. But when the first year he did it, he had that Super Mustang with the shotgun motor in it and the blower. And he was supposed to have 2, but one of them got crushed on the way over. And it's a story in itself. But
so George Hurst at this point bought Earhart brakes.
Correct.
And he was actually he was lobbying the NHRA to add a stop sign to the drag strip.
Oh, okay.
They wanted to have it where the cars would accelerate, then stop in the middle of the track, and then accelerate again.
Well, we have guys who do that now with some of these events where they do a stop, start, stop, and show the tightest stopping distance or whatever. I don't think it makes for good spectator sport. And it's kind of like watching Stutterbox bracket cars. Sorry if you're a Stutterbox bracket racer, but I say that only as a purist photographer. So
Kathy just sent me a note. You could talk about magazines.
Yeah, we could. I don't know. Maybe it's just because I'm so brokenhearted, Tony. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, I did this for 30 years. I always had a fallback. And some of you might not know this, but, I ran Mopar Muscle for a couple of years. Then I did Mopar Enthusiast. When Mopar Enthusiast was going on, I took over High Performance Mopar. The publisher pulled the plug on Mopar Enthusiast, shut all their magazines down. I was out of a job. And and then this thing with Mopar Action getting shut down, and then the deal with Peterson 5 years ago. I always had a fallback into the magazine world because there were always so many magazines out there, and we were the last guys standing. It's over. So I'm here. I'm here, and again, Tony, thanks for your encouragement, because I am kind of getting a little more visceral thrill. You can hear as I kind of talk about this stuff. I'm going to have to go back and saturate myself in history again, because I don't remember all the stuff I used to, but I'm having fun with the medium, and I'm going to keep playing with it till I get it right.
Well, you know what, dude, it's a new world out there. Like, it's different, but it's the same. Okay.
Right.
Like, there are things that are happening now, let's say like in the no prep world. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a replay of a lot of the things that happened in this golden era, the 60s and the 70s.
I think, yeah, that's true.
The personalities are pretty much interchangeable. Even the power and the characteristics of the cars, very, like, it's funny too, because like I watch some of these like no prep guys run, right? And it's like I see, like, I have no experience with those cars at all, but I recognize exactly the things that they're doing, and I'm like making tuning changes in my head for them based on, because it's that interchangeable.
Yeah, right.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Well, there's certainly, I mean, when you, again, in my photo archive, I've got photos of some of these altered wheelbase cars and homemade altered wheelbase cars as that era kind of wound down in 67. And that stuff was rough. I mean, those were raced out race cars. And the truth was, a lot of this no prep stuff, I mean, at least most of those guys have got a roll cage in there. They do some tech. But yeah, that's pretty scary stuff. And I did my share of street racing, but I have zero desire to be in the middle of that on a competition / super performance level. I think you're asking for trouble.
They have more balls than brains.
Yeah, well, and when we're younger, we do have that.
Yep.
But the problem is if you're bound to repeat history, and unfortunately, history killed a lot of people. So you kind of want to know what could go wrong before it goes wrong, because the wrong thing happens, you don't get a second chance. Bad stuff happens.
So let's talk about your channel and your plans for it.
Okay, so here's what I'd like to do. Again, I initially was going to start with kind of this esoteric. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, but I really think that I'll take your advice. We'll do mostly car stuff, and what I want to do is try to focus in on these small snippets of history. So I've got all these vintage racing magazines and newspapers. I've got vintage racing photography. I've got a bunch of the drag times crash photography from the early 70s, and stuff that people haven't seen before. So I'm going to just try to create some kind of regular programming. I don't know if it's going to be as long as anything like we're doing here. I kind of like that 10 to 20 minute format, try to get everything consolidated, because as you've seen, and sorry to the viewers, but I can ramble and ramble and ramble. And, it's better for me to have it tight, because I will stray to the edge of the guardrails and try to reel it back in. And that doesn't always work as well as it could.
You were born for podcasts.
Maybe I was. Maybe I was.
You know Neil Van Opry?
What's that?
You know Neil Van Opry?
Yeah, I know Neil Van Opry.
Yeah, you and Neil, man. If you got you and Neil together on a podcast type of thing, it would be like a 24-hour deal. It would just never stop.
Yeah, but I don't want to listen to myself for 24 hours. I don't know why anyone else would.
Because this is interesting stuff, man.
Well, that's it. Again, when you're in my wheelhouse on this historical stuff, and again, I want to apologize, because some of my recall really, it sincerely just isn't what it used to be. Because I used to read this stuff constantly, and it made it easy for me to just recount these facts. But the thing is I just had such a passion for the past, for the history of drag racing and the history of racing technology, and that's spread out. You know, I learned more and more about different kinds of racing or performance changes that the OEMs would pick up because of racing and things like that. And you begin to try to get the big picture. You try to take the whole thing and synthesize it down to the points, you know, that are most important. I know when I did my book on the Motown Missile, and to be honest, that was the last book I'm probably going to do. You know, it was great to be able to go through the NHRA rule books and the copies of Dragster and try to segue how these rules changes were driving the Chrysler guys crazy and what might have caused that to happen. Whether was it a quick run here, or was it a record here, or was it somebody complaining? And you know, eventually Sox and Martin quit and discussed, and you know, and the factory obviously was having its own financial issues.
Well, it was called total domination.
What's that?
It was called total domination.
Well, it was only until the end of 1971. You got to remember what happened in 71 was Ronnie Sox won every single round of NHRA Pro Stock but two. Not every single race, every single round of NHRA Pro Stock he was in, he won all but two. He lost to Dino Don at Englishtown because of a flat tire. And then I think he got outrun. He got flat outrun someplace, I think at the World Finals. Because Mike Fonz won the 71 title. That's why Sox didn't win it.
Well,
at the end of that year, the Chrysler went to NHRA, and NHRA said, we're not going to let you do this again. And at the Nationals in 71, Chrysler won every single eliminator. Every single one.
That was every single one.
So the first thing NHRA did is they stretched out super stock and stock to get low horsepower cars into there. Until that point, it was only the super stock, maybe to either the G, I think it was just a G in 71.
That's right.
And then they stretched it way out. And so the full block Chevy had an inherent advantage there. I'm just saying that's just the way it was. So after 71, you know, Chrysler fought an uphill battle with pretty much everything they tried to do in drag racing, and IHRA wasn't much better. You know, it all the sanctioning body. IHRA was the first one to go to the sliding weight break deal and the differing things, and you know, it was just the way it was. It was not going to be. It wasn't until 82 when they went to the 500 cubic inch flat out deal that it began to basically isolate out the most potent combination on a level playing field. But you look at talking to Wally Booth. I have a book that never got published on Pro Stock in 71 and 72. And I talked to Wally Booth, and he talked about what he went through to put cylinder heads together for that AMC car that couldn't win. I mean, him and Maskins and you know, it was crazy what they had to do to make a Pro Stock cylinder head. But according to one of Landy's kids, one of Landy's kids told me that the reason that you know, Bob Glidden did what he did in '79 with the Arrow was he simply put a Cleveland head on it that he already knew how to massage, and he figured out a way to make that look. And I don't know if this is true or not, but the bottom line is that it was the whole story was that there wasn't quite what the factory technology might have been.
Okay, now I can tell you for certain. I can absolutely tell you for certain because I've seen the pictures of that engine with the valve cover off. Yeah. And those were inline valves.
Right. Early in the year, that's true. But the bottom line is Glidden figured it out. I know Kofel.
You froze.
In 79, it was over. You know, it was, you know, the company was going back into financial problems, and, you know, it was going to take Iacocca and a big pile of, you know, federal money to bail them out that time.
And minivans. But it all really came to an end when they decided to rewrite the concept of Pro Stock and let Jenkins put that 331 in the Vega.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Again, I covered that pretty heavily in my Motown book. You know, Jenkins almost left. He had a bad run, and he was I think he was the only might have been one of the cameras might have qualified, but the whole feeling was 14 Mopars and one or two other cars, and he was actually was a 32 car field. So the bottom line is you know, once he figured it out, you know, and Spihar told me when they looked at the car at Pomona, they're like, well, we didn't get to do any of this stuff. You know, we just spent $1 bazillion on titanium. We put titanium everything in here.
The wire car.
And a lot of good that's going to do us. And NHRA basically said, we don't really care what you think. The car is legal. He's going to be able to run. So
But you know what? For content for your channel, that
Yeah.
71 Nationals where Chrysler had a suite
Yeah,
of
yeah.
every single class, every single eliminator. That's a great topic.
Oh yeah,
So,
I agree. I agree. Yeah, I'll
do
put
that
something
one.
together with that. That'd be cool. That'd be cool.
You know,
So,
people don't understand today the domination that Chrysler had back then.
well, and again, it was the factory was the last guy standing. I mean, and Mr. Hoover and the other guys will tell you, they really didn't care how much money they made. It was about winning. You ran through them like Sherman ran through Georgia. You crushed them like ants, and that was their philosophy from the get-go. As the Ram Chargers in 1959 showing up with the first tunnel ram and everything. This was no guesswork. These were all things that these guys, had figured out scientifically, and they were light years ahead in many regards to a lot of people from an engineering standpoint. But it was all purist. There was no money from Chrysler for them to do most of that stuff. That was all working nights and weekends.
The thing about that car, the high and mighty car, and this is something that's haunted me like my whole life. Okay, so they were focused on the intake. They were focused on ram tuning. They were focused on sonic pulses. But at that period of time, they had no real concept of exhaust scavenging.
No, they didn't. In fact, Wayne Erickson, who got killed in a fire at the 60 Nationals, Wayne had done some of the custom headers up, but they were trying to figure that out. And they worked on it. They just kept working on it.
Could you imagine what that car would have done if they actually had a set of tuned headers and collectors on that thing?
Yeah, who knows?
Absolute science fiction. It would have been so far beyond what anybody else was capable of doing at that period of time.
Well, again, Mr. Hoover and Mike Buckle and Tom Coddington, that Dave Rockwell book, We Were the Ram Chargers, just gone back into print again. That book has got great background on that high and mighty car, pages and pages talking about how they figured some of that stuff out.
Let's get back to the magazines for a minute, because
Let's get back to the magazines.
The video, I got my water. I don't drink or anything anymore. Just nothing. So I watched the video you did on the Mopar action thing.
Yeah.
And you made some really good points. Not so much about having it in hand, okay? Because I agree with that. There's something about holding the magazine in your hand. But really, the permanency of like 100 years from now, people can go back and actually touch these magazines like they're real. And the things that we do today electronically just vanish. Like you and I were part of a message board 25 years ago, bro. Nitronic research.
Oh, yeah. Cole Kunch's deal. Yeah, and I talked about that a little bit because I can remember, reading these back and forth. And, the cool thing was all the old Nitro guys were on there. And they would talk to each other like, they were just like you and I would be talking about stuff. And there was all kinds of stuff that came out of that you didn't know. I remember, I'm trying to think, the Piranha, and there were several guys, but Foster was the one who kind of stuck in me, only from the standpoint that he did have those stories and stuff that had happened. And like I said, when that board went down, and Cole might have it backed up, I don't know. I hope he does, but that stuff went into the ether. You can't get it back. I didn't print hard copies out.
Well, and I don't think you can find that on the Wayback Machine. But the point is, to your point about like the way that this stuff just vaporizes, that message board. I'm here at the house now, but if I was doing a live at the office at my shop, okay, I have a big Nitronic research banner behind me, right? Because that was the most amazing brain trust.
It really was. I mean, that's true.
It was. And the stuff we do today, like now, I have way over 1,000 videos up. That's all gone in the blink of an eye, right?
Yeah.
All of the knowledge, everything I experience, and all of the things and that we cover just disappears, and it's gone forever. And that does bother me about what we do here now.
Sure. I
You
mean,
know?
in the end, the archival nature of this stuff is much better than it was when it first started. So that's true. I mean, my only thought was that with a printed item, you could always go back to something that no one could re-edit, no one can re-upload, no one can. I mean, what was written on that page that day and printed by that printer is still the same as it was when it was done, and it'll be the same 100 years from now. There's stuff on the internet that will certainly stay unaltered, but let's just say that there's something catastrophic that happens and all this stuff suddenly goes down and they can't back it up, or they can only back part of it up, or whatever. We just don't know. And the other problem is I can go into a magazine called Drag Racing and look at nothing but drag racing. Chasing stuff through the internet, there, you get RuPaul's Drag Race. I mean, you get all kinds of crazy stuff chasing drag racing. So it's not as simple as we'd like it to be to access the data. So
there's another factor to this too. When I was really trying to learn this stuff, right? Like the construction, the differences, fuel systems,
right.
With the magazines, especially magazines like Drag Racing USA, okay,
Yeah.
It had beautiful full-page pictures of an engine, of a chassis, you could actually sit there and study what was being done, and then you could see the difference between different chassis manufacturers.
Sure,
you can
absolutely.
start the era. Okay, well, the engine was here when the tires were like this and the clutch was like this. Then the engine was here when the tires were like this and the clutch was like that. And you can chart the evolution by studying the photos. And you don't get that opportunity on the internet. You don't get that opportunity on a YouTube video. Nobody sits there and studies and learns for themselves by deciphering what's in the picture. Instead, it's whatever I'm saying or you're saying, and that's it. And the picture is a fleeting thing, and nobody studies it, and it blows past. There are some downsides to what we do.
Yeah,
there's a lot of downsides to the YouTube thing.
Yeah, and again, the magazine medium. Now I can put a story up on the internet, and I can run. Let's say I want to run 30 photos of a car or a car motor or whatever. I can do that. The magazine, you got 4 or 5. I know when I was doing the Landy book, Thomas Follinger dragged out some pictures of Landy building his 68 Charger, tech photos that had been shot. And it was great stuff, and it had never been published. So we put it together for the book, and I did a story for Johnny Hunkins at Mopar Muscle on it. And, but it was neat stuff, but it was all outtakes. This was all stuff nobody had seen. There had been 1 or 2 photos that had run as part of some other aside story in Hot Rod magazine as a 1-pager on oil pans or something, but the rest of it had been buried forever.
Dude,
so, but that stuff remains. I mean, that stuff is in the Getty archive, and they were able to access it, but will that go on forever? I don't know.
So when I was up for the editor's job at Superstock, like I said, Guccione had just bought it, right? He had some editor in there for a couple of issues. I forget what his name was. They flew me out there. We did the interview, and then they told me that they were still moving things over.
Dave Featherston. Wasn't Dave Featherston the guy in charge then?
Yes. All right. So they told me that they were still moving things over, and they were organizing and so on and so forth, because they were in Virginia, and now they're in California in Canoga Park. So I said, what stuff? And they were like, well, the archives. And I was like, oh, I'd love to see that. So, dude, I spent a day in there. Okay,
I'm sure you did.
There were file cabinets with all the time I had. It was all the time I had.
Yeah.
There were file cabinets. They moved all of the file cabinets from Alexandria, Virginia, over to Canoga Park, and nothing was sorted, nothing was organized, nothing was.
It was a mess.
But every one of those drawers that you would open was all of the. So okay. So the guys who are watching don't understand, right? When you photograph something for a magazine, let's just say, right, you're going to take pictures of a car, all right? There's 6 pictures, 8 pictures that end up in the magazine. But if
it was Hot Rod, it was 2. It was a motor photo and a body photo. It was a 1-page story on the gasser.
Yes.
But like you said, you couldn't print that much.
100 pictures were shot
during
that thing. So in these archives were construction shots of I remember the Ram Charger's top fuel car. There was stuff that was just astounding, from a historical perspective. I have
So,
no
so let
idea
me
what it is.
catch you up on. I'll tell you a quick story about that. Not that any of my stories are quick, but so I'm working for Roe at Elapsed Times, and I'm doing this story. I'd gone up and Brian Greer is right here in Kingsport, and I'd gone up and taken pictures of all of Sherrill's archives, and I was putting this story together about Sherrill winning the championship in '74. So I called out there. Now I knew that Todd Westover had saved the archives, and they had gone.
Todd, yes, Todd.
Todd Westover was the guy who was running the archive in Canoga Park, and they had gone to Peterson. And Neil Britt had shot the photos. So I'm trying to think. I might have got a hold of Neil on Facebook, but I said, those photos you took of Sherrill after the fire at the World Finals, were they? Did you keep them? He said, no, they're still in the Superstock files. That time, Thomas Bollinger was doing the file. He found the sheet of negatives, and we were able to publish some of that stuff in that story on Sherrill Greer. So yeah, it was awesome stuff. I think all of it's with Getty now, though. I don't think any of that stuff is left with the Peterson company.
So Neil Britt, you brought up Neil Britt, right?
Yeah.
Just a quick story. My first appearance in a print magazine was when I was 17 years old. Okay, Neil Britt took the picture.
Is that right?
So they used to Carcraft did a series called Cruisin' USA.
Oh yeah, I remember. Okay.
So they came to Staten Island.
Is that right?
They came out. So this was the most insane night. I will never forget this.
Oh yeah.
This was in 1977 or 1978, right?
Yeah.
So I had a 69 Charger. It was a 446 pack, and the starter had taken a dump on me, and I couldn't get it out there. So I was there on foot. All right. It had gotten so out of control with people doing burnouts and wheelies. And trying to think, the Dancing Bear. What was his name? It was a gasser. It was like a sea gas vet. He brought this thing out on Highland Boulevard and stood it on. I mean, just stood it straight up and ran across the intersection of Highland Boulevard and New York.
Yeah.
It was so out of control. The
cops,
they stopped trying to stop it, and they just blocked traffic. And for that night, it was a hot rodder free for all. It wasn't like these takeovers when people are doing donuts and shit like that.
No, it was no. Hey, like I said, I street raced in Philly, and they never came to Philly when I was around. But yeah, if that Cruisin' USA was showing up, I mean, the sky was indeed the limit. And
so at any rate, we had the whole night. The cops blocked it off. Highland Boulevard was a drag strip. And Neil Britt took a picture of the intersection after somebody had done a burnout through the intersection, and it was all smoke and shit and fog. And I'm standing right on the median of the two. I got a leather jacket, white T-shirt, black leather jacket. And if anybody ever comes across that issue, I would like to see that picture. I'd like to have that picture. I haven't seen that magazine in years. It was like a
Carcraft Cruisin' USA with the Staten Island coverage in it. Yeah.
Yep, cool. That was my first appearance in a magazine.
Good for you. Very cool, man.
All right. So listen, bro, we're at this for 2 hours now, which is like.
Yeah, we've rambled on. I agree. So but we should do it again. I mean, let's chill for a little while, and we can catch up again, and we'll find something to talk about, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know what? I want to get together with. I think it would be really fun. Let's get together with Steve Maggs because he's.
Oh, it's funny you bring that. I was just thinking that today. Me and you and Magneto, and we can talk altered wheelbase cars or early funny car evolution or whatever. That'd be a ton of fun.
Oh, we got to get Brian in there too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that'd be a ton of fun.
I was on the phone with Steve for about an hour this morning.
Oh, did you?
Just
yeah. Well, like I said, you were the one who told us he was having a hard time, and we're just glad he's still alive, man. I first met Steve at the very first Hot Rod reunion in Bakersfield. I was publishing Quarter Milestones, so I managed to, I had enough freelance work. I managed to talk my wife into letting me fly out, and Steve was in the pits selling magazines, and we had both started at Chrysler Power. We'd both published our first. Chrysler story had been in Chrysler. My first photo had been in Superford. My first story had been in Chrysler Power. So we both started right there.
I got to tell another quick story. Robert Aschieri, you remember him?
Yeah, I remember Robert. Yeah.
Okay, Chrysler Power.
Yeah, he had Chrysler. He had Mo Performance, I think is what he called it, and he got caught up in some kind of legal stuff, and then he had to change the name to Performance for the Chrysler Power Enthusiast. But I used to buy that out of the trunk of his car. He'd come to Front Street. He was in Philly. He'd show up on Front Street on Friday night when he had a new issue, and he'd sell them out of the back of his car for whatever, $3. And then he'd street race with his wife and his kid in the car.
Yeah. Friday nights, we'd go out to Atco. We'd run at Atco till they closed, which was usually around 11:30, 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then we run over to Front Street and race until the sun came up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Melrose Diner or one of the other places, and people would set up the money deal. And
it was great.
I remember calling away, the cops would show up and people would be getting arrested. And like I said, I did stupid stuff. So
Front Street was awesome. But I'll tell you a real quick story because you brought this up and it has to do with magazines and shit like that, right?
Yeah.
So we're at the Englishtown swap meet. You remember the Englishtown swap meet, right?
Sure. Yeah, swap meet where, here, buy a rock for $1, I'll give you a beer.
Yeah, right. and you
Honest, I saw the front of this Corvette off this morning, but it's not stolen.
So
I was there, buddy.
I'm at the swap meet, right? I'm selling Hemi stuff. I got a van full of 426 Hemi stuff, blocks, eggs, you name it, okay?
Yeah.
Now you got to picture this. On my row, okay, there's me. I'm set up selling all of this stuff. There's like 5 or 6 vendors, and then there's Tony D'Agostino. So you know Tony D'Agostino, right?
Yeah, I know Tony, yeah.
Graveyard Cars.
Yeah.
So
that was long before Graveyard Cars, but yeah.
Well, the people who watch him would know Tony D'Agostino through Graveyard Cars.
That's
and Tony
true.
and I were
That's
friends when we were kids, right?
Yeah, he and I go way, way back. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm here, okay, and I was out of money because as I was selling stuff, I was buying stuff. And my pockets are empty now, right? My pockets are empty. At the end of the day, it's Sunday afternoon, right? And everybody's ready to start breaking down and pulling out. So I'm here trying to move shit, trying to get some cash to just get home, right? D'Agostino is 4 or 5 vendors over on the same side. And across from us, in the middle between us, and Robert Aschiera was there, okay? Also in this row. So it's me, D'Agostino, Aschiera, right? Across from us the whole weekend is a B5 Blue 71 Charger. Now, it's always right? It just says 71 Charger. So on the windshield, it just says 71 $600. Okay, and nobody cares about these cars, right? 71 Chargers is junk. Scrap it, right? We want $600 for this thing.
Is it an RT?
It's a Super B, but it didn't have a hood. Okay. And we didn't even know it was a Super B.
Right.
All right. At the same time, within minutes of each other, the people on either side of this Charger leave. They've packed up and they're leaving. And now I see the side of the car. And I see a torque box. And I'm like, it's a Hemi car. It's a Hemi car, right?
Was there no gear in it? No driveline in it?
Was that?
Was the driveline out of it?
Driveline was out of it.
Okay.
Driveline was out of it. It was B5 Blue, white gut, bench seat, automatic on a column.
Nice car.
Yeah. All right. So Robert Aschiera sees the same thing that I see, and we both start moving like this towards the car, and D'Agostino's in the middle, right? And I'm like, okay, I got no money. I'm thinking to myself, what do I got to do here? And Aschiera and I are both going like this, and we're about to converge at the car, and I kind of went over like this, and I shouldered him like that, right? He was telling me, you're gonna have to fight me for this thing, all right?
Yeah, right.
He gets up, he's ready to throw down. D'Agostino, I'm like, Tony, I need $600 quick. And he's like, what do you mean? Just give me $600. So he gets into his pocket, he gives me $600. And I'm like pushing Aschiera away. And I walked over to the guy who's not take the car. I bought the car. 71 Hemi Super B for $600.
What did you do with it?
I ended up selling it to a guy in Missouri like a year later. I had no place to put it.
Okay. Yeah.
But then right after that, I bought a 66 Hemi Satellite, 4-speed, running driving car for $600.
Yeah, that's cool.
Drove it home.
Yeah. I mean, that stuff was trickling out. You know, I knew a guy in South Jersey who called himself Mr. Hemi. Anatoly Vasilyev, and he bought wing cars, he bought e-bodies, and the second gas crunch hit in '78. Anybody who hadn't sold theirs in '73 was ready to get out.
Yep.
So he
People today cannot imagine how worthless these cars were.
What's that?
People today cannot imagine how worthless these cars were. There's
Right.
just a little cult fringe like us Mopar freaks that, oh, I gotta have that, right?
Well, and I'll be honest with you, we were dirtball street racers. We'd buy cars for $50 or $100. When we were done with them, they went to the junkyard. We didn't. A lot of times they were used up when we were finished with them because they were used up when we bought them.
Dude, in 1982, 1981, something in that era, I took a Sawzall to a completely rust-free Hemi Challenger. I took a Sawzall to the wheel openings to get 1432s on it. So he goes,
don't tell anybody that. Oh, we're live. Now you're in trouble.
but that's the way it was back then.
Who knew? I mean, that's the truth. And like you said, I mean, I can remember going to junkyards outside of Wilmington, Delaware, and they'd be crushing RTs, and you'd go in and try to buy a little trim off it before it went into crusher. But that's the way it was. I mean, it was the end of that era, and especially in the Northeast, the cars rotted out and they were done. So
yeah, but I wouldn't trade a minute of that for.
We lived in a great time, man. It was a ton of fun. It was a ton of fun.
I get anytime I'm working on something on the channel. I just did a video the other day about a Carter carburetor issue, right?
Yeah.
And just because it's just the way it is, I did it on the fender of a car.
Okay.
I use the fenders of cars to put tools, to put parts, to put.
Right.
I don't want anything. I don't want to own anything that I can't just put a carburetor on the fender and start taking screws off of. Right?
Yeah. Right.
And every time I do,
you're saying you didn't have that Plymouth Troubleshooting Award bib over the fender when you did this?
All right. So listen, we're gonna wrap this up, right?
Yeah, we got to wrap this up, man.
All right. So I just saw Mexican Spec. I just put Mexican Spec put a link to your YouTube channel.
Oh, cool. Thank you, man.
Do that again. One of you guys, whoever's. There you go. Mexican Spec just put a link to Geoff's YouTube channel. Please go over there, give him a sub, watch his videos. He's got this guy has. The difference between him and I, right, is that he's an actual real journalist. I'm an autistic freak.
You know what? I never went to journalism school. I bullshitted my way to graduate from high school. I talked my English teacher into graduating me by writing 5 short stories instead of doing any classwork.
But you're a researcher.
Yeah.
You do this stuff. You know what I'm saying?
I live in the middle of it. That's true. That's true.
Right? So I have the greatest respect for you. I always have because of that. So
thank you, man. I appreciate that. I very much do.
And locomotives. See, that's the other thing too. You and I have a thing for locomotives.
I figured it out. It's anything that uses fire and smoke and makes a lot of noise. You gotta love it. I mean, it just any machine that I love steel mills, and I love anything that has a racket to it that makes something that has a purpose. I don't want purposelessness. Drag racing is perfect for me because I want efficiency. Drag racing might be wasteful, but it is efficient. You go from point A to point B faster than the other guy. It's real simple. And if you don't, you blow up. So
I had a shirt that I wore for years. This was my favorite shirt. I wore it until there was just a couple of threads left, right? And on the back it said, if you haven't seen God, you're not going fast enough. But on the front, it had a logo like this one over here had a logo, and it was a blown Hemi, okay, and then the words around it was just like smoke, noise, and fear. It was like you just summed up my life.
Yeah. Now I like the one that Garlitz used to sell that had TC Lemon's quote in the back. I didn't want to tell my mother I was drag racing, so I told her I was in prison for 20 years. Well, it was a fun run, man. I mean, it's all good. And I'm going to do Bristol in a couple of weeks, and they got Nostalgia Funny Car running, and we'll see what happens. I haven't been doing any. The last race I went to NHRA was 22, and the only race I did last year professionally, I was on the pit road at Bump Day for the Indy 500, with some help from some of my buddies at Meekum Auctions. So I had never been to the Indy 500 when they were running hot cars on the track, and that was pretty cool to see, to be right on pit wall watching that stuff go by it. And yeah. So don't need to do that again, but it was fun to do it once.
I'm gonna schedule something. We'll figure out a good time. Maybe we'll do it on a weekend, on like a holiday weekend or something. You know,
yeah, let's do it. Well, here's the thing. Like I said, I got all this original photography. I got a bunch of crash and burn stuff nobody's seen since it was published in the 70s, and we can do show and tell.
There is nobody on YouTube doing, you know, crash and burn stuff. You know, if it bleeds, it leads. You know, it's one of those things. Yellow journalism. So that's another great topic. Just random crash and burn videos.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's a lot of oddball stuff. It's stuff that came out of drag time. So it's Fred Goski burning the Coca-Cola duster to the ground at MIR by Bissell, and you know, Mr. Norm's car in a ditch with nothing left but the frame, and you know, just fires, and a Beach City Corvette burning to the ground. I mean, I got a bunch of, I collected a bunch of that stuff.
That's one of the best pictures I've ever seen.
Yeah.
The Beach City Corvette.
Yeah, it burned, baby. It cooked down there at the top end of the racetrack.
From bumper to bumper.
Yeah.
It's the perfect silhouette of the car.
Well, the second photo is even better, where the guy has got it towed up on the trailer, and he's just like looking like, what am I going to tell my wife? I mean,
All right. So yeah, but we'll schedule. So we got Steve Meggs and we got Brian, and we'll just sit one night and just brain puke. You know,
yeah, let's do it. Yeah, just give me some leeway, so I'm mentally ready for it in terms of just kind of boning up a little bit on stuff. Because like I said, I don't recall like I used to. I used to be able to pull that stuff out instantaneously, and I just can't. I've gotten to be that old. So,
dude, I got brain damage. I got legit brain damage. So it's like, I don't know.
I've spent 30 years next to nitro cars. I've got to be somewhat brain damaged myself, and I'm a Mopar guy. What do you expect? We were not right to start with.
All right, so I'm going to say goodnight to everybody. Our mods Mexican Spec, thank you. Zero was here. I don't know if he's still here or not. Fubar, I'm not sure if Fubar was here or not. But guys, thank you so much as always. Everybody who joined us, we greatly appreciate. Anybody contributed super chat? I don't even know if there was any super chat tonight. Anybody contributed super chat? Thank you so much. It's always
the problem Tony had with doing any answers to questions is, you know, I like I said, I rabbit trail pretty good. So we'll try to keep it in the guardrail next time, guys.
No, this is great. Don't worry about it. We're having fun. I'll have fun. And everybody contributed just your presence in your conversations. We are eternally grateful to you guys, because we could not do this stuff without you. Thank you so much. Please go over, give Geoff a sub, and start getting him, share his stuff, get his hours up, and let's get him monetized in this business hardcore. And guys, I'll see you all on Sunday night. Yeah. So
thanks, guys. Appreciate it. All right, pal. Take care. Bye-bye.